I woke up in a sterile VIP hospital room to the sound of my mother-in-law whispering outside my door. She was not asking if I was going to survive. She was asking my sister-in-law if my husband had managed to hold my unconscious face up to my phone screen to unlock my bank accounts. They laughed, completely unaware that I was awake, listening to every word, and that I had already set a trap they could never escape. My name is Sydney, 33 years old, and the founder of a digital accessibility tech company. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family who thought they could destroy you. The first thing I registered was the sharp clinical smell of antiseptic. Then came the physical sensation of being buried under a ton of wet sand. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy and my mouth was as dry as ash. I tried to move my fingers, but they refused to obey my brain. The steady rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed in the quiet space, confirming I was in a hospital. I forced my eyes open, just a fraction, letting the harsh fluorescent light filter in. I was in a private VIP suite in downtown Seattle. Through the half-open door, hushed voices drifted into the room. I immediately recognized the harsh, demanding tone of Beatrice, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. Beside her was Melanie, my 31-year-old sister-in-law. "Are you absolutely sure she took it?" Beatrice hissed. Her voice was dripping with impatience rather than any sort of maternal concern. "Relax, Mom," Melanie whispered back, letting out a quiet, chilling laugh. Gavin poured the wine himself. She drank the whole glass before the appetizers even arrived. "By tomorrow morning, everything will be ours." "Did Gavin get her phone unlocked?" Beatrice pressed. She sounded frantic for a payout. "He said he needed her face to bypass the security application." "He is working on it right now," Melanie said. "The paramedics were rushing, so he had to step back, but he told Kendrick he has until Friday to wire the funds." My blood ran completely cold. The fog in my brain momentarily parted, replaced by a sharp, terrifying clarity. I pieced together the fragments of the previous night. It was supposed to be a celebratory family dinner. After 5 grueling years of working 80-hour weeks, I had finally sold my tech startup to a major conglomerate for $8 million. Gavin, my husband of 4 years, had insisted on hosting an intimate dinner at our home to celebrate my massive payout. I remembered him walking out of the kitchen holding a bottle of my favorite Cabernet. I remembered his loving smile as he poured my glass. I remembered taking a long sip, feeling a strange, bitter aftertaste. 10 minutes later, the room started spinning violently. I remembered clutching the edge of the mahogany dining table, my legs giving out beneath me, and the terrifying darkness swallowing me whole, while my so-called family just sat there and watched me fall. They did not call an ambulance because they were worried about my health. They called an ambulance because they poisoned me. Beatrice had always looked down on me. She constantly reminded me of my modest background, calling me a computer nerd who did not know how to exist in high society. She hated that her golden boy's son had married a woman who built her own wealth instead of inheriting it. And now she had conspired with her children to drug me and steal my life work. Panic flared in my chest, hot and suffocating, but I forced my breathing to remain perfectly steady. I could not let the heart monitor spike and give away that I was conscious. I kept my eyes slitted as the hospital door creaked open further. I felt someone stand directly over my bed. The distinct scent of heavy, expensive floral perfume washed over me. It was Beatrice. "Sleep well, you little orphan," Beatrice muttered under her breath. She turned on her heel and walked out, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. The moment the latch clicked, my eyes snapped open wide. The sedatives were still dragging my body down, making every muscle ache, but pure adrenaline surged through my veins. I needed to move. I needed to secure my life and my assets before Gavin could access my accounts. I slowly turned my head, scanning the dim room. My leather tote bag was sitting on the visitor chair in the corner. Gavin must have brought it along to make it look like a normal, rushed medical emergency. He definitely had my primary phone, the one with the biometric face locks. But Gavin was arrogant, and arrogant men make critical mistakes. He did not know about my second phone. Second? Working in digital security had taught me to always maintain a physical backup. I had a secondary, highly secure device stitched directly into the hidden lining of my tote bag. It was completely off the grid, untraceable, and unconnected to my public financial accounts. Every movement was agonizing. I dragged my heavy leaden legs toward the edge of the hospital mattress, gritting my teeth against the violent wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. I slid off the bed, my bare feet hitting the freezing linoleum floor. I gripped the metal IV pole to steady myself, dragging it with me as I stumbled toward the chair. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I unzipped the tote bag. I dug my fingers into the false bottom seam, ripping the Velcro apart with a soft tearing sound. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the backup phone. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. It lit up, fully charged and ready. I opened my encrypted messaging application and selected the only contact saved on this device. Elliot, my estate attorney. Elliot was a 45-year-old legal shark in the Seattle wealth management scene. He was the kind of man who dismantled hostile corporate takeovers for fun. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely loyal to me. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, ignoring the intense tremor in my hands. I typed the most important message of my life. I am at the hospital. They drugged me at dinner. Gavin has my main phone and is trying to bypass the facial recognition to access my bank accounts. Execute the defense plan, now. I hit send. The confirmation checkmark appeared instantly. I shoved the backup phone deep into the pocket of my hospital gown, just as I heard heavy, familiar footsteps approaching down the hallway. I scrambled back into the bed, throwing the thin blanket over my legs and closing my eyes, letting my breathing slow to a deep, rhythmic pace. The door handle clicked. Gavin was coming back, thinking he had a helpless, incapacitated wife waiting to be robbed. He had no idea he had just triggered his own absolute destruction. The heavy wooden door pushed open with a soft swoosh. I kept my breathing shallow and even, letting my eyes flutter as if the sudden light from the hallway was pulling me from a deep slumber. Gavin rushed to my bedside. His expensive leather shoes squeaked slightly against the linoleum. He gripped my hand with both of his, leaning over me so closely I could smell the rich Cabernet from our dinner still lingering on his breath. "Sydney, baby. Oh, thank God you are awake." His voice cracked perfectly on the last syllable. It was a masterful performance. If I had not just heard his mother and sister discussing how to drain my bank accounts, I would have believed the raw panic in his tone. I would have felt guilty for causing him such distress. I blinked slowly, letting a convincing look of confusion wash over my face. "What happened?" I whispered, making sure my voice sounded hoarse and fragile. "You collapsed at dinner," he said, smoothing a strand of hair away from my forehead. His touch, which used to bring me comfort, now made my skin crawl. "The doctors ran a battery of tests. They said your blood pressure bottomed out. The attending physician believes you suffered a minor stroke brought on by severe exhaustion." A minor stroke. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. He had poisoned me at our own dining table, watched me hit the floor, and was now weaponizing a fake medical diagnosis to strip away my autonomy. "They said it is the stress from the company buyout." Gavin continued, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. $8 million is a massive transition. You have been working yourself to the bone for 5 years, Sydney. Your body simply gave out. But do not worry. I am right here. I am going to take care of everything. With a swift, practiced motion, Gavin reached into the sleek leather briefcase he had brought into the room. He pulled out a polished metal clipboard with several neatly stacked documents clipped to the front. He unclicked a heavy gold pen from his shirt pocket. "The hospital administration is pressing for your insurance and billing authorizations," he said, keeping his tone light and conversational as if he were asking me to sign a grocery receipt. "But since you are incapacitated, they need a medical power of attorney and a financial proxy on file. It just allows me to handle the immediate medical bills and finalize the incoming wire transfers from your company sale while you rest. Just a formality, baby. Just sign right here at the bottom." He pressed the cold gold pen against my palm. As I stared at the dense legal jargon printed on the page, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The red flags had always been there, waving violently in the wind, but I had been too blind, too in love, and too exhausted from building my tech empire to see them. I remembered the $40,000 credit card debt I discovered 2 years into our marriage. Gavin had sworn it was a banking error, a victim of identity theft, that he was quietly resolving to protect our credit score. I remembered the time $50,000 vanished from our joint savings account. He claimed he had borrowed the down payment for his luxury car because his annual bonus was delayed, assuring me it was just a temporary cash flow issue. I had funded his entire facade of the successful finance executive. I had paid for the designer suits, the expensive watches, the lavish dinners. He was a hollow shell of a man drowning in debt, and my $8 million payout was the ultimate lifeline he was willing to kill for. I let my fingers go completely limp. The gold pen clattered onto the linoleum floor, rolling away under the hospital bed. "I cannot," I murmured, letting my head roll to the side. "My vision is blurry, Gavin. The words are swimming." A flash of genuine irritation crossed his face, breaking his devoted husband character for a fraction of a second. He quickly bent down, retrieving the pen and pressing it back into my hand with a slightly firmer grip. "Sydney, you need to sign this now," he urged, his voice dropping an octave, losing its comforting warmth. "The hospital needs it. I need to make sure your company funds are routed correctly tomorrow morning before the banks close for the weekend. Just grip the pen. I will guide your hand." I let out a weak, pathetic sob, closing my eyes tightly. I squeezed his hand, playing the terrified, broken wife to absolute perfection. "The doctor said I had a stroke, Gavin. My brain is too foggy. I cannot even read my own name right now. You said I needed to rest. Please let me sleep." I felt his jaw clench. The muscles in his hand tightened around mine, bordering on painful. He was cornered by his own narrative. He had told the hospital staff I was suffering from severe exhaustion and a neurological event. He could not physically force a visibly weeping, incapacitated woman to sign complex legal and financial documents with the door propped open and nurses constantly walking past in the hallway. "Just a signature, Sydney," he pressed one last time, a dangerous edge of desperation leaking into his voice. I let my breathing slow down, ignoring his plea, acting as though the sedatives had pulled me back into unconsciousness. I relaxed every muscle in my body, going completely limp against the pillows. I heard him let out a sharp, frustrated breath. He aggressively snatched the clipboard off my lap, the papers rustling violently as he shoved them back into his briefcase. He muttered a string of quiet curses under his breath. "I will be back first thing in the morning," he whispered coldly, leaning over my face. "You are going to sign these papers, Sydney." His footsteps retreated and the heavy door clicked shut once more. I lay there in the quiet hospital room, the phantom pressure of his grip still lingering on my skin. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me, weak, compliant, and ready to hand over my life's work. He thought tomorrow morning would bring him an $8 million victory. Instead, tomorrow morning was going to bring him absolute devastation. My phone buzzed quietly against my thigh inside the hospital gown. I slipped my hand down and pulled out the device. It was another message from Elliot. The text read clearly on the bright screen. "I have reviewed the security logs. Your brother-in-law, Kendrick, failed the hardware bypass. He is locked out of the home server. I have the medical proxy revocation forms ready. We strike at dawn." I locked the screen and slid the phone back into its hiding place. Gavin wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception, but he had no idea he was sitting at a table with someone who held every winning card. I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to strategize every single move I would make when the sun came up. The moment Gavin's heavy footsteps faded completely down the sterile corridor, I threw off the thin hospital blanket. I knew his habits better than he knew himself. He was heading to the gourmet coffee kiosk on the ground floor for his double-shot espresso, a daily ritual he would never skip, not even while his wife was supposedly recovering from a catastrophic neurological event. That gave me exactly 14 minutes of absolute privacy. I reached into the deep pocket of my gown and pulled out the encrypted backup phone. The screen glowed with a new, highly detailed alert from Elliot. The message outlined a severe digital emergency that went far beyond Gavin's clumsy attempt to force a pen into my hand. The security protocol on my home server had just logged multiple brute force attempts on the physical safe, holding my primary hardware crypto wallet. The logs Elliot forwarded showed a rapid, highly sophisticated algorithmic sequence trying to spoof my biometric security key. I stared at the lines of code scrolling across my screen. Gavin was right here at the hospital, completely focused on acquiring my physical signature. He could not possibly be at the house executing a high-level cyber attack. Beatrice lacked the basic technological literacy to operate a smart television, and Melanie thought cybersecurity meant changing her social media password once a year. There was only one person in their inner circle with the technical capability and the arrogant audacity to attempt a direct hack on a hardware wallet. It was Kendrick. Melanie's husband was a 34-year-old African-American crypto consultant who drove a matte black sports car and wore bespoke Italian suits that cost more than my first home. He loved to dominate family dinners with aggressive lectures about blockchain technology and decentralized finance. He constantly dismissed my digital accessibility company as a cute little charity project, completely ignoring the fact that my software had just been acquired by a global conglomerate for $8 million. Lately, his extravagant lifestyle had shown massive, glaring cracks. Rumors of a severe liquidity crisis at his investment firm had reached my ears through my own industry contacts. Whispers of an unstable Ponzi scheme and angry investors demanding their funds were circulating in the Seattle financial sector. He desperately needed a massive injection of capital to avoid federal scrutiny, and my buyout money was the perfect untraceable lifeline. I could not afford to focus solely on the financial threat against my home server. I needed undeniable, legally binding medical proof of the physical assault before the drugs metabolized and left my system entirely. If I waited for the hospital's standard morning blood work, Gavin could easily use his fabricated financial proxy to intercept or alter the records. I needed someone completely independent. I opened my secure messaging application and dialed a number I knew by heart. Dr. Eris Thorne was a brilliant private diagnostician and a trusted ally who sat on the medical advisory board of my tech company. More importantly, he had top-tier access privileges within this specific hospital network. He picked up on the first ring. I spoke in a rapid, hushed whisper. "Eris, I am in room 412 of the VIP wing. I need a full comprehensive toxicology screen run completely off the books. I was poisoned at dinner last night. Do not alert the attending physician and do not put anything into the hospital's main digital registry yet. Just get here right now." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a calm, professional acknowledgement. Aris did not waste time asking pointless questions. He simply told me he was in the adjacent building and would be there in 5 minutes. I watched the seconds tick by on my phone screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Exactly 4 minutes later, the heavy door pushed open silently. Aris slipped inside wearing standard blue scrubs, a mask pulling down around his neck, holding a concealed phlebotomy kit. His eyes locked onto mine, registering the pale, clammy state of my skin and the unnatural dilation of my pupils. He moved to my bedside with practiced efficiency. He tied a rubber tourniquet tightly around my bicep, his hands steady and professional. "You have a combination of central nervous system depressants in your system," he murmured softly, tapping my vein. "I can see the physiological markers. Who did this to you?" "My husband," I replied, my voice steady, despite the sharp pinch of the needle breaking my skin. "He and his family are trying to drain my accounts." Aris did not flinch. He drew 3 large vials of deep red blood, swapping them out swiftly. He labeled them with a randomized numerical code, rather than my name, to ensure absolute anonymity. "I will run these directly through my private laboratory across the street," he whispered, packing the vials away into his secure medical bag. "I will expedite the testing for heavy sedatives, muscle relaxants, and common paralytics. You will have the certified, legally binding results uploaded directly to your encrypted server within the hour." He removed the tourniquet and pressed a small bandage to my arm. "Keep playing their game, Sydney. Act exactly as weak as they expect you to be. The moment you have everything you need, we will bring the hammer down." As Aris vanished back into the busy hospital corridor, I pulled down my sleeve to hide the fresh bandage. I checked Elliot's message thread one last time. The firewall protocols on my home server indicated that Kendrick was growing increasingly desperate. He was actively attempting to install a backdoor Trojan to route the funds into a decentralized, untraceable offshore account the very moment the primary lock was disabled. The revelation struck me with a cold, sharp sense of irony. Melanie and Kendrick were not just waiting for Gavin to successfully extort my signature. They were actively trying to steal the money before Gavin could get his hands on it. There was no honor among thieves, only a vicious race to see who could betray the others first. I tucked the encrypted phone safely back into the hidden lining of my gown, just as the door handle clicked loudly. Gavin strolled back into the room holding a steaming paper cup of coffee, a manufactured look of deep concern plastered back onto his face. He had absolutely no idea that his own brother-in-law was currently trying to cut him out of the heist, and he was completely unaware that I had just secured the irrefutable medical evidence to put every single one of them behind bars. Gavin approached my bed, offering a sympathetic smile as he set his paper coffee cup on the metal side table. Before he could launch into another calculated attempt to make me sign his fraudulent legal documents, the heavy door swung open. Beatrice and Melanie marched into the room. Beatrice carried a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies, the kind you would normally see at a funeral rather than a recovery ward. Melanie followed closely behind her, clutching her designer handbag, like a shield, her eyes darting around the room to assess my physical condition. A hospital nurse entered right behind them to check my intravenous line and record my vitals. Beatrice immediately seized the opportunity to control the narrative. She intercepted the nurse with a heavy theatrical sigh, placing a manicured hand over her own chest. "It is just so tragic to see her like this," Beatrice whispered, pitching her voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear clearly. "But we always feared something like this would happen. Sydney has a long documented history of mental instability. It runs deep in her bloodline, just like her late mother." My heart pounded a violent rhythm against my ribs, but I kept my face utterly blank, forcing my expression to remain slack and confused. Beatrice was weaponizing the deepest, most painful trauma of my life. My mother had battled severe clinical depression for years, struggling relentlessly to keep a roof over our heads on a meager waitress salary. She eventually lost that battle when I was 19, leaving me completely alone to navigate the world. Ever since Gavin and I started dating, Beatrice had wielded my mother's illness and our working-class background like a blunt instrument. She constantly made subtle cutting remarks at family gatherings, reminding me that I was a charity case who had miraculously married up into the prestigious stable world of her successful son. Beatrice wanted everyone to believe that my success was a temporary fluke, and my eventual collapse was a genetic certainty. Now she was using that exact malicious narrative to legally declare me incompetent to manage my own finances. Melanie stepped up to the foot of my bed, feigning a look of deep sorrow as she looked at the nurse. "She simply could not handle the pressure of running a tech company," Melanie added, shaking her head in mock sympathy. "All those late nights, the stress of the buyout, the millions of dollars involved. It simply broke her mind." We tried to warn Gavin that a girl from her modest background was not equipped for this level of corporate stress. Now poor Gavin has to bear the heavy burden of managing her estate and her intensive medical care. The nurse offered them a polite, sympathetic nod before finishing her checks and quickly exiting the room. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, the fake sympathy vanished completely from my in-laws' faces. Beatrice dropped the expensive lilies onto the visitor chair, not even bothering to put them in water or arrange them. I forced tears to well up in my eyes. I let a pathetic, trembling sob escape my lips, burying my face in my hands. I swallowed the burning, suffocating rage that threatened to consume me and leaned entirely into their twisted fantasy. "You are right, Beatrice," I cried, letting my voice shake with manufactured despair. "You were always right. I never should have pushed myself this hard. The buyout negotiations, the lawyers, the endless pressure, it was all too much for me." Gavin immediately sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms securely around my shoulders. He looked up at his mother with a triumphant gleam in his eye. See, I told you she just needed to rest and realize her limits, he said smoothly, playing the role of the benevolent savior. I feel like I am losing my mind, I whimpered, clutching the fabric of Gavin's expensive shirt. My thoughts are so scattered. I cannot focus on numbers or contracts anymore. I feel exactly like my mother did at the end. It terrifies me, Gavin. I do not want to end up like her. Beatrice stepped closer to the bed, a predatory, victorious smile stretching across her face. Hush now, Sydney. You do not need to worry your fragile little head about business or finances anymore. You are part of our family now, and we take care of our own. Gavin is perfectly capable of handling the $8 million. You just need to sign the proxy forms he brought you, and you can focus entirely on getting your mental health back on track. We will find you a nice, quiet facility where you can recover without any responsibilities. Melanie chimed in, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Exactly. Kendrick and Gavin have already discussed the best investment strategies for your payout. They know exactly how to protect the money from taxes and market volatility that you clearly cannot comprehend right now. Just sign the paperwork and let the men do their jobs. You can just relax and go shopping once you feel better. Hearing Kendrick's name almost made me break character. They were all so blinded by their own greed that they could not even coordinate their lies. Melanie actually thought her husband was helping Gavin manage the funds, while I knew for a fact that Kendrick was simultaneously trying to hack my private server to steal the money entirely for himself. The sheer level of deception running through this family was staggering. They were a den of thieves ready to turn on each other the second the money cleared. I looked up at Beatrice with wide, fearful eyes, nodding meekly like a broken, defeated child. I will sign them, I whispered, letting out another shaky, exhausted breath. I just need the hospital medication to wear off a little more so I can hold the pen properly. My hands are still too weak. I promise I will sign everything over to Gavin first thing tomorrow morning. I just want to go home and forget about the company completely. Please just let me sleep for now. Beatrice and Melanie exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated victory. They had broken the stray dog they had always despised. They had conquered the self-made tech founder and reduced her to a weeping, compliant mess. They truly believed they had won. Gavin kissed my forehead, telling his mother and sister to wait outside so I could rest. He promised them the paperwork would be finalized at dawn. I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes and letting my breathing slow. They thought tomorrow morning would be their ultimate payday, but they were walking blindfolded into an absolute massacre. Midnight settled over the hospital wing like a heavy shroud. The relentless bustling of nurses and the squeaking of medical carts finally faded into a quiet, rhythmic hum. Alone in the dim light of my room, I sat up and carefully adjusted my posture against the stiff pillows. The lingering haze of the sedatives was finally beginning to lift, replaced by a razor-sharp adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. I reached into the hidden lining of my gown and retrieved my encrypted backup phone. Gavin believed he had completely isolated me. He assumed that by confiscating my primary device and keeping me confined to a hospital bed, he had blinded me to the outside world. He underestimated me just as he had for the entirety of our marriage. When I moved my tech startup headquarters into our home 2 years ago, I installed a series of high-definition motion-activated nanny cameras disguised as smoke detectors and bookshelf ornaments. I initially put them in to monitor the cleaning staff around my expensive proprietary hardware prototypes. I never told Gavin about them because he had always mocked my obsession with digital security, calling me paranoid. Tonight, that paranoia was my greatest weapon. I opened the secure monitoring application and typed in my master passcode. The screen flickered for a fraction of a second before displaying a grid of live feeds from my house. I tapped on the master study. The high-resolution night vision snapped into sharp focus, casting an eerie greenish glow over what used to be my pristine sanctuary. My home office had been thoroughly ransacked. The heavy oak bookshelves I had custom ordered were completely cleared out, with hundreds of books and decorative pieces shoved recklessly onto the hardwood floor. The large abstract painting that usually hung behind my desk had been torn down and tossed aside, revealing the heavy steel face of my concealed wall safe. Standing directly in front of the safe was Gavin. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and his hair was sticking up in sweaty, frantic clumps. He was holding a heavy-duty power drill, violently pressing the humming bit directly into the reinforced steel casing of the lock. Sparks flew in erratic bursts, illuminating his face. He looked absolutely feral, stripped of the polished, charming corporate manager persona he wore so perfectly in public. Sitting at my mahogany desk was Kendrick. Melanie's husband had completely abandoned his usual suave, untouchable demeanor. The bespoke Italian suit jacket was thrown over a chair, and his tailored shirt was visibly soaked with sweat under the arms. He had a specialized hacking rig connected to his laptop, with a thick black cable running directly into the digital keypad of my safe. He was typing furiously, his fingers flying across the keys as lines of unauthorized code reflected in his glasses. I tapped the audio icon on my screen, unmuting the live feed. The high-pitched, agonizing whine of the power drill grinding against solid titanium blasted through my phone speaker. I quickly lowered the volume, pressing the device closer to my ear. "This is impossible!" Kendrick shouted over the noise of the drill, slamming his fist down on my desk. "I told you, Gavin, this encryption is military grade. She has a physical YubiKey lock tied directly to a decentralized hashing protocol. Every time I try to force a backdoor entry into the digital vault, the system triggers a localized lockdown. If I push it any harder, her security software is going to wipe the hardware wallet completely clean to prevent unauthorized extraction." Gavin killed the power to the drill, breathing heavily. He wiped a mixture of sweat and metal dust from his forehead, glaring at his brother-in-law. "You told me you were a crypto genius, Kendrick. You literally run an investment firm. You bragged about cracking multi-signature wallets last Thanksgiving. Just get into the damn server and disable the secondary lock so I can drill through the casing." "That is different," Kendrick shot back, his voice rising in panic. "Those were standard commercial wallets. Sydney built this architecture from scratch. The biometric seal on this safe is tied to the exact server you are paying me to crack. I cannot just bypass a physical security key with a generic script." Melanie paced back and forth in the background, holding a crystal wine glass filled to the brim with my most expensive vintage Pinot Noir. She carefully stepped over the piles of ruined books on the floor, looking thoroughly annoyed by the entire situation. "Why are you two making this so complicated?" she whined, taking a large gulp of wine. Sydney already promised she would sign the wire transfer forms at the bank tomorrow morning. Once she moves the $8 million into Kendrick's management fund, we just split it and walk away. "Why are we destroying the house right now?" "Because I do not trust her," Gavin snapped, turning his furious gaze toward his sister. "And I do not trust that the bank will clear a transfer of that size without a mandatory holding period. The hospital proxy is good, but if she wakes up tomorrow and suddenly changes her mind, or if the bank manager demands an in-person verification, we are entirely locked out. The backup hardware wallet is inside this safe. If we get the physical ledger tonight, Kendrick can bounce the crypto assets through a dozen offshore mixers before the sun even comes up." Melanie rolled her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. "You are both acting completely paranoid. We broke her today. She was literally sobbing in the hospital bed, begging you to take control of the money because she thinks she is going crazy. She is weak. She is going to sign whatever you put in front of her." The drill in Gavin's hand suddenly sparked violently, letting out a sharp, dying, grinding noise before smoking and seizing up completely. He threw the heavy tool across the room. It smashed into my glass display case, shattering it into 100 jagged pieces. Gavin grabbed the edge of the desk, leaning aggressively into Kendrick's personal space. His eyes were wide, manic, and completely devoid of sanity. "Just break the firewall, Kendrick. I do not care how you do it. Just get it done right now. I need $2 million by Friday to cover my options trading debt, or they will break my legs." The words echoed through the quiet hospital room, freezing the blood in my veins. The audio feed went dead silent. Even Melanie stopped pacing, her wine glass hovering inches from her mouth. Kendrick stared up at Gavin, his hands hovering frozen over the laptop keyboard. "Options trading debt." Kendrick repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You told us you just needed a bridge loan to secure a real estate acquisition. You never said anything about owing bookies. You owe $2 million to loan sharks." Gavin ran his trembling, soot-covered hands over his face, letting out a ragged, desperate breath. I leveraged my corporate accounts on a massive short position that went completely sideways. I tried to win it back through unauthorized margin accounts, and I lost everything. The people I borrowed from to cover the margins do not send collection letters, Kendrick. They send people to your house with baseball bats. If I do not wire them $2 million by Friday afternoon, I am a dead man. I sat back against the hospital pillows, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The entire horrific truth was finally laid bare. The pristine, successful corporate finance manager was nothing but a degenerate gambler who had leveraged his life away. He did not poison me just out of sheer greed or to fund his mother's luxurious lifestyle. He poisoned me because he was backed into a lethal corner by violent criminals. He was quite literally offering my life in exchange for his own. He decided that my heart stopping at the dinner table was an acceptable price to pay to keep his own legs from being shattered. I felt a cold, terrifying smile stretch across my face. I opened my messaging application and drafted a new text to Elliot, attaching the raw audio and video files I had just captured from the live feed. The stakes just changed, I typed, ensuring my fingers hit every key with absolute precision. Gavin is not just a thief. He is drowning in $2 million of illicit options trading debt and owes violent creditors. He needs the money by Friday to save his own life. Lock down the trap for the bank tomorrow. We are not just taking their money, we are handing them over to the wolves. The notification ping on my encrypted device sliced through the heavy silence of the hospital room. It was not Elliot this time. The message came through the secure medical portal Aris had set up for me just hours ago. The subject line read simply, "Diagnostics." My fingers felt remarkably steady as I opened the attached PDF file. I scrolled past the clinical headers and hospital codes straight to the toxicology breakdown. The bright screen illuminated the harsh, undeniable truth of my marriage. The report detailed a massive, near-lethal concentration of a fast-acting benzodiazepine, but that was not the worst part. Layered beneath the sedative was a staggering dose of carisoprodol, a heavy prescription muscle relaxant. I recognized the chemical name instantly. It was the exact medication Gavin kept in his leather toiletry bag, prescribed months ago for a supposed lower back injury from his weekend golf games. The combination of those two central nervous system depressants was not just designed to knock me out. When mixed with the alcohol from the Cabernet he poured me the cocktail, creates a synergistic effect that aggressively suppresses the respiratory system. He had not just drugged me to steal my phone. He had played a reckless, lethal game of Russian roulette with my life. A fraction of a milligram more, and my heart would have simply stopped beating at our dining room table. Gavin would have played the grieving widower, inheriting my entire estate without having to force a single signature. I locked the screen and let the phone drop onto the sterile white blanket. For 4 years I had shared my bed, my home, and my life with this man. I had celebrated his promotions, comforted him through his fabricated corporate stresses, and trusted him implicitly. A small naive part of me had still been hoping that maybe his mother had orchestrated the poisoning, that maybe Gavin was just a weak pawn going along with Beatrice's malicious plan. That last pathetic shred of hope withered and turned to ash. There was no grief left inside me. There were no tears. The woman who had loved Gavin died on that dining room floor the moment her heart struggled to beat under the weight of his poison. The woman sitting in the hospital bed right now felt absolutely nothing but pure calculating ice. I pulled the thin hospital sheet up to my chin and stared at the dark ceiling. I mapped out the remaining sequence of events in my mind, anticipating their moves, blocking their exits, and ensuring that their imminent destruction would be absolute. By the time the first rays of gray morning light began to filter through the hospital blinds, I was entirely ready for war. At exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy door to my room pushed open. I immediately slitted my eyes, preparing to play the exhausted, broken victim for Gavin. But it was not my husband who walked through the door. A man entered wearing an ill-fitting cheap gray suit, a slightly rumpled tie, and thick framed glasses. He carried a battered leather messenger bag and wore a laminated visitor badge that identified him as a courier for a local insurance adjusting firm. He looked completely unremarkable, the kind of low-level administrative worker who blends seamlessly into the background of any corporate or medical building. The door clicked shut behind him. The man reached up, removed the thick glasses, and offered me a sharp, predatory smile. It was Elliot. "You look terrible, Sydney," my attorney whispered, his voice brisk and entirely devoid of fake sympathy. "I feel fantastic," I replied, sitting up and dropping the exhausted victim act completely. "Did you bring it?" Elliot stepped up to the bed and unlatched his messenger bag. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents neatly organized in a blue velvet folder. He placed them directly onto my lap. "Gavin just texted me from the lobby," I said, checking my primary phone, which Gavin had conveniently left on the side table before he went home to hack my safe. "He said he is bringing Beatrice and Melanie, and they are bringing the bank transfer forms. He wants to execute the wire transfer at my private bank the second I am discharged tomorrow." Elliot let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "They are practically wrapping the noose around their own necks. These documents are visually identical to the standard wire transfer and asset reallocation forms your private bank uses. The font, the formatting, the signature lines, they are perfect replicas." I opened the blue folder. On the surface, the papers looked exactly like the authorization Gavin needed to drain my $8 million account into Kendrick's fraudulent offshore fund. But the fine print hidden within the dense legal jargon was a masterpiece of legal warfare. The first document was not a wire transfer. It was an irrevocable asset freeze, legally locking every single joint account Gavin and I shared, severing his access to my credit lines, and revoking his financial proxy entirely. The second document was a formal submission of evidence linking Kendrick's decentralized crypto fund to federal wire fraud, complete with the audio transcript I had captured last night. And the third, Elliot said, pointing to the final stack of papers, is the absolute best part. A civil suit for Beatrice and Melanie, charging them with conspiracy to commit fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress, paired with a permanent restraining order for Gavin citing domestic violence and attempted murder, supported by your private toxicology report. I ran my fingers over the crisp, heavy paper. Gavin thought he was going to walk into that bank and walk out a millionaire. He thought he could buy his way out of his violent gambling debts, using the very life he tried to extinguish. "The bank manager is a personal friend of mine." Elliot continued, sliding his thick glasses back onto his face. "I have already secured the VIP conference room for tomorrow morning. I will be waiting inside when you arrive. I also took the liberty of notifying the Seattle Police Department and the Federal Field Office. They will have unmarked vehicles stationed outside the bank entrance." I nodded, slipping the blue folder under my mattress, just as I heard familiar voices echoing down the hallway outside. Beatrice was complaining loudly about the hospital coffee. Gavin was right beside her, offering placating words. Elliot quickly adjusted his cheap tie and picked up his messenger bag, immediately transforming back into a harmless, overworked insurance paralegal. He gave me one final sharp nod. "Happy hunting, Sydney," he whispered. He opened the door just as Gavin reached for the handle. Elliot offered a polite, awkward apology, slipping past my husband and mother-in-law without drawing a second glance. Gavin walked into the room, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of resistance. He had no idea the man he just brushed past had just handed me the weapon to execute his total ruin. The heavy door clicked shut behind Elliot just as Gavin pushed it open from the hallway. I immediately let out a sharp, ragged gasp, throwing my arms around Gavin's waist the moment he stepped close enough to the bed. I buried my face into his pristine shirt, my shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. He froze for a fraction of a second, clearly surprised by the intense clinging display before awkwardly wrapping his arms around my hospital gown. "Sydney, baby, what is wrong?" he asked, his voice dripping with absolute faux concern. He set his coffee cup down on the tray table, playing the role of the attentive, worried husband to perfection. "I am just so scared," I cried, letting my voice tremble uncontrollably. "The walls feel like they are closing in on me. The doctors say I need to avoid all stress, but my mind will not stop racing about the buyout, the money, the company. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. Please, Gavin, take me home." I just want to go home. He patted my back, exchanging a triumphant look with Beatrice and Melanie, who had just stepped into the doorway behind him. I could not see their faces, but I could feel the greedy shift in the room's energy. Of course, sweetheart, Gavin murmured smoothly. I will get the discharge papers processed right now. The discharge procedure took less than an hour. I insisted on sitting in a wheelchair, playing the role of the frail, broken woman to absolute perfection. Gavin pushed me through the automatic sliding doors into the crisp Seattle air, puffing out his chest as the valiant protector. Beatrice and Melanie flanked us, hovering closely, like vultures waiting for a carcass to drop. During the ride back to our house, I stared blankly out the window of Gavin's luxury SUV. I kept rubbing my temples, muttering about how the pressure of the tech industry had finally crushed me. I never should have negotiated that deal, I whispered loud enough for everyone in the car to hear. $8 million is a curse. It is too much responsibility for one person. I just want my life to go back to normal. In the rearview mirror, I caught Melanie biting her lip to hide a massive predatory smile. When we pulled into our driveway, Kendrick's matte black sports car was already parked out front. He stood by the front door wearing a sharp designer suit and a perfectly calibrated expression of brotherly concern. I knew exactly what he was really feeling beneath that expensive fabric. Pure, unadulterated panic. He had failed to hack my hardware wallet last night, and the clock was ticking on his federal investigation. The moment Gavin helped me out of the vehicle, Kendrick rushed forward. Sydney, we were so worried, he lied smoothly, offering a gentle embrace. Let us get you inside and comfortable. We gathered in the living room. I noticed immediately that the shattered glass from the display case Gavin broke last night had been hastily swept up, though a few glittering shards remained hidden in the rug fibers. I collapsed onto the plush sofa, pulling a cashmere throw blanket up to my chin. Gavin sat right beside me, while Kendrick, Beatrice, and Melanie took the opposing armchairs. They looked exactly like a tribunal waiting for a final lucrative verdict. I took a deep, shaky breath and looked directly at Gavin, then shifted my gaze to Kendrick. I have made a decision. I announced, my voice quiet and intentionally brittle. Laying in that hospital bed thinking my life was over, it gave me total clarity. The money is destroying me. It is destroying my health and my peace of mind. Gavin leaned in, his eyes wide with anticipation. What are you saying, baby? I reached out and took his hand, tracing his knuckles. I am saying I cannot handle the pressure of this $8 million payout. I do not want to look at another financial portfolio or tax structure as long as I live. I am transferring the entire sum to Kendrick's management fund tomorrow morning. I want you two men to handle everything. A heavy, electric silence descended over the living room. Gavin's grip tightened around my fingers. He was practically vibrating with victory, completely unaware that Kendrick planned to steal the money the second it hit the crypto fund. Kendrick leaned back in his armchair, crossing his legs and steepling his fingers. A smug, condescending smile spread across his face. It was the exact same patronizing expression Kendrick had worn for the last 3 years every time I mentioned my software company. At family barbecues, he would loudly boast about his alpha male financial status, generating phantom wealth in the crypto market. He had always referred to my groundbreaking accessibility algorithms as a cute little computer business, completely dismissing my intellect because I did not wear aggressive power suits or trade highly volatile digital assets. He thought I was just a lucky amateur who stumbled into tech money. Sydney, that is a very mature decision, Kendrick said, his tone thick with arrogant superiority. Running a little computer business from your home office is one thing, but managing an $8 million liquid asset portfolio requires serious financial literacy. It is a man's game, frankly. You focus on recovering your fragile nerves. Gavin and I will ensure the capital is deployed into high-yield decentralized assets. You will never have to worry about a single spreadsheet again. I looked down at my lap to hide the lethal calculating glare burning in my eyes. Thank you, Kendrick, I whispered softly. I knew I could count on family. Beatrice clasped her hands together, practically bouncing in her seat. This is wonderful news, Sydney. We will head to your private bank first thing tomorrow morning to authorize the transfer. You can sign the papers in person, and then Gavin will take you straight to a luxury spa retreat for the rest of the week." I nodded slowly, playing the obedient, exhausted wife who had finally surrendered. "Tomorrow morning," I agreed. "We will go to the bank and finish this." Gavin kissed my cheek, his mind clearly racing toward paying off his violent loan sharks. Kendrick pulled out his phone, likely preparing his offshore accounts to receive the stolen funds. Beatrice and Melanie exchanged looks of pure, unadulterated triumph. They had all taken the bait, swallowing the hook, line, and sinker. They believed they had broken me completely, but they were simply marching toward their own absolute ruin. That evening, the atmosphere in my home transformed from a tense recovery ward into an opulent celebration. Beatrice had taken it upon herself to order an extravagant catered dinner from one of Seattle's most exclusive private chefs, billing the entire feast directly to Gavin's credit card. The irony was palpable. Gavin was sweating over a $2 million debt to violent criminals, yet he allowed his mother to splurge on imported caviar and roasted truffles just to maintain the grand illusion of their impending wealth. I was guided from the living room to the head of the dining table like a fragile piece of porcelain. Gavin pulled out my chair, gently pressing a kiss to my temple before taking his seat beside me. Instead of the poisoned wine from the night before, he poured me a tall crystal glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon, playing the role of the attentive caretaker. I accepted the glass with a weak, grateful smile, wrapping both hands around the cool crystal as if I needed it to anchor myself. The dining room was quickly filled with the clinking of heavy silver and the cheerful, booming laughter of people who genuinely believed they had just won the lottery. The main course had barely been cleared from the table when Melanie could no longer contain her overwhelming excitement. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick, glossy brochure, tossing it onto the center of the mahogany table with a triumphant smack. The pages fanned open, revealing high-definition photographs of a custom-configured Porsche Cayenne Turbo. Melanie leaned forward, her eyes glittering with unadulterated greed as she tapped her manicured fingernail against the $200,000 price tag printed at the bottom of the page. She looked directly at Kendrick, though her loud words were meant for the entire room. She announced that since Kendrick's management fund was about to secure such a massive influx of capital, it was finally time for a lifestyle upgrade. She detailed the custom ivory leather interior, the upgraded twin-turbo performance package, and the exclusive midnight blue paint color she had selected. She spoke about the luxury vehicle as if the dealership had already handed her the keys. It was a staggering display of arrogance. She was literally building her dream car, using the exact funds she believed she was stealing from me, in less than 12 hours. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, nodding along, and telling her the ivory leather would look absolutely stunning on her. Not to be outdone by her own daughter, Beatrice immediately hijacked the conversation. She waved a dismissive hand at the Porsche brochure, declaring that cars were rapidly depreciating assets and that real generational wealth belonged in real estate. Beatrice pulled out her digital tablet and propped it up against a crystal floral centerpiece, swiping through a highly exclusive private real estate listing. She proudly displayed a sprawling waterfront estate located in Medina, one of the most expensive and elite zip codes in Washington state. The listing price was easily $5 million. Beatrice enthusiastically described how she planned to tear down the existing sunroom to expand the stone patio facing Lake Washington. She talked at length about hiring an interior decorator to replace the modern fixtures with classic old-money aesthetics. She turned to Gavin, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, and suggested that since his career was taking such a monumental leap forward with this new capital, he should absolutely help his mother secure her forever home. She even had the audacity to suggest that there would be a lovely, quiet guest house on the back of the property, where I could recover in peace, completely isolated from the main house and out of their way. I smiled softly, telling Beatrice the waterfront view was breathtaking and that she truly deserved a home that reflected her high status. The men at the table were equally drunk on their own delusions of grandeur. Gavin and Kendrick had opened a bottle of rare bourbon that cost more than my first car, pouring generous measures into heavy crystal glasses. They clinked their glasses together across the table, toasting loudly to family loyalty, to legacy, and to the future. Kendrick boasted about the absolute security and high-yield returns of his decentralized crypto platforms, spinning a web of complex financial jargon that he clearly thought went right over my medically compromised head. He promised Gavin that the $8 million would be fully integrated and hidden behind impenetrable layers of blockchain anonymity by noon tomorrow. Gavin nodded eagerly, his eyes slightly bloodshot from the alcohol and the underlying desperate panic of his violent debts. He praised Kendrick's financial genius, completely blind to the fact that Kendrick was actively planning to funnel the money into his own failing Ponzi scheme and leave Gavin to the absolute mercy of his loan sharks. They were two desperate drowning men congratulating each other on finding an anchor that was actually an anvil. I sat perfectly still amidst the swirling chaos of their greed, nursing my sparkling water. The sheer blinding arrogance radiating from every corner of my dining room was intoxicating to witness. They were openly dividing my life's work, spending my money in their heads, and decorating their future mansions with the spoils of my supposed mental collapse. They looked at me not as a human being, but as a signature, a weak, broken hurdle they had already successfully cleared. Every boastful claim, every expensive fantasy, every toast they made was adding another layer of fuel to the inferno I was about to ignite. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to defend myself or my intellect. I just sat there smiling, with the placid, vacant expression of a defeated woman, silently memorizing the unearned joy on their faces. I wanted to remember exactly how happy they looked in this precise moment, so I could compare it to the absolute devastation that would shatter their entire world tomorrow morning. The opulent dinner carried on late into the night, a premature victory lap for a race they had already catastrophically lost. The opulent dinner finally began to wind down, leaving behind a battlefield of empty wine bottles and half-eaten artisan desserts. Beatrice and Melanie retired to the plush velvet sofas in the living room, giggling loudly as they scrolled through virtual tours of multi-million-dollar waterfront properties on their tablet. Gavin and Kendrick stood up, stretching their arms and announcing their plan to step out onto the terrace for their celebratory cigars. This was the exact transition I had been waiting for. I knew their routine flawlessly. Every time they felt particularly powerful or successfully deceitful, they retreated to the balcony to smoke and validate each other's inflated egos. I let out a soft, manufactured groan, pressing my fingertips against my temples. I told Gavin the rich food and the overwhelming excitement were making me dizzy again. I asked him if he could run upstairs to the guest bedroom and fetch a specific weighted blanket from the cedar chest to help calm my fragile nerves. He kissed my forehead and hurried up the staircase, eager to keep his golden goose comfortable and compliant. The moment his leather shoes disappeared around the landing, I moved with absolute precision. I stepped quickly toward the sliding glass doors leading to the terrace. Reaching into the deep pocket of my oversized cardigan, I pulled out a military-grade voice-activated audio recorder. It was no larger than a matchbox equipped with a heavy-duty magnetic base and a noise-canceling microphone designed to pick up whispers in a hurricane. I slid the glass door open just an inch, reached down, and firmly attached the magnetic device directly beneath the heavy wrought iron patio table where they always sat. I pulled my hand back and closed the glass door quietly just as Gavin bounded down the stairs, wrapping the heavy blanket around my shoulders with a sickeningly sweet smile. I thanked him weakly, leaning heavily against the wall, as I excused myself to the master bathroom to rest. I locked the thick wooden door behind me, turned the shower faucet on full blast to mask any noise, and pulled my encrypted backup phone from my pocket. I opened the secure audio application and synced it to the hidden transmitter on the terrace. The live feed hissed to life with crystal clear audio. I heard the crisp, sharp metallic click of a heavy lighter, followed by the deep exhalation of cigar smoke. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the chilly Seattle wind coming off the water. Then the arrogant, boastful facade Kendrick had worn all evening completely shattered. His voice dropped into a low, frantic whisper vibrating with absolute terror. "We are out of time, Gavin. I cannot wait for standard bank clearing protocols. You have to force her to wire the funds directly to my offshore ledger the second you get to the bank tomorrow morning." I heard Gavin shift uncomfortably in his wrought iron chair. "Relax, Kendrick. She is completely broken. You saw her at dinner. She is practically begging us to take control of the money. We will do the standard transfer, wait for it to clear, and then map out the investments just like we planned." "There are no investments!" Kendrick hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "My management fund is completely empty, Gavin. It has always been empty. It is a Ponzi scheme. I have been paying early investors with capital from new clients for 3 years to maintain the illusion of high-yield returns. Now the entire market is crashing and my liquidity is entirely gone." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the audio feed. Even through the digital transmission, I could feel Gavin's sheer shock. "What are you talking about?" Gavin demanded, his voice rising in anger. "You told us you were managing a decentralized empire. You told my mother you were generating 20% returns month over month." "It was all a lie to keep the capital flowing," Kendrick admitted, his breathing growing ragged. "And now it has all collapsed. The Securities and Exchange Commission audited my primary holding company last week. The Federal Bureau of Investigation served me with a subpoena yesterday morning. They are actively monitoring my domestic accounts. If I do not provide proof of an $8 million liquidity injection to pacify the federal auditors by tomorrow afternoon, they are going to freeze my passport and indict me for massive wire fraud. I am looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary." I sat on the edge of my bathtub, staring at the tiled floor, a cold smile stretching across my face. The successful, condescending crypto genius was nothing but a desperate criminal standing on the edge of a federal prison sentence. "You son of a bitch," Gavin snarled, slamming his fist down on the iron table right above the hidden microphone. "I brought you into this payout to hide the money from Sydney, not to fund your failed criminal enterprise. I owe $2 million to violent loan sharks. I leveraged my corporate options trading accounts into the ground, and these men do not care about federal audits. They care about getting their cash. If I do not pay them by Friday, they are going to find me and break my spine." They were two drowning men fighting over a single life preserver, neither realizing they were both securely tied to an anchor. "Listen to me," Kendrick pleaded, his tone shifting into a frantic, desperate negotiation. "We can both survive this. You make sure Sydney signs the absolute release forms at the private bank tomorrow morning. You push the wire transfer directly into my decentralized Tumblr account. The second the 8 million clears, I will immediately route your 2 million to whatever dark web ledger your loan sharks use. Your debt gets wiped out instantly. I take the remaining 6 million, pacify the federal auditors just long enough to unfreeze my travel assets, and I flee to a non-extradition country before the SEC can lock me up." Gavin breathed heavily into the microphone. "You are talking about stealing $6 million from my wife and fleeing the country. What am I supposed to tell Sydney and my mother when the money vanishes?" "You tell them the decentralized market crashed," Kendrick countered smoothly, fully leaning into his sociopathic nature. "You blame market volatility, you blame hackers, you blame whatever you want. Sydney is already convinced she is losing her mind. You institutionalize her file for financial conservatorship, and you walk away free from your gambling debts. But none of that happens unless she signs the bank release tomorrow." A long, tense pause followed. I could picture Gavin staring out into the darkness, weighing his own life against my entire life's work. The decision did not take him long. "Fine," Gavin finally said, his voice cold and resolute. "We do it your way. The second her pen leaves the paper at the bank, I will initiate the transfer. But if you try to screw me out of my 2 million, Kendrick, I will point the loan sharks directly at you." "We have a deal," Kendrick agreed. I reached down and pressed the red square on my screen, stopping the recording. I saved the file, labeling it with a simple numerical code, and forwarded the pristine high-definition audio directly to Elliot's secure server. Within seconds, my attorney replied with a single brutal text message. "Federal evidence acquired. The trap is locked. Sleep well, Sydney. Tomorrow we execute them." I stood up from the edge of the bathtub, turned off the running shower, and looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I had survived a lethal poisoning, endured days of psychological warfare, and listened to my family plot my financial and mental ruin. But the game was officially over. Tomorrow morning, Gavin and Kendrick were going to walk into a private bank expecting to steal $8 million. Instead, they were going to walk straight into a federal prison cell. I dried my hands, unlocked the bathroom door, and stepped out to join the monsters in my living room, ready to play my part for one final night. The sun rose over Seattle, casting a cold gray light through the massive windows of our home. I had not slept a single minute, but I felt more awake than I had in 5 years. Walking down the grand staircase, the suffocating atmosphere of greed hit me instantly. Beatrice and Melanie were already in the kitchen, sipping artisanal coffee and laughing. They were dressed as if they were attending a royal coronation. Beatrice wore a stark white cashmere coat over a tailored navy dress, a thick string of pearls resting against her collarbone. Melanie had draped herself in designer labels, clutching the exact same handbag she had mentally paid for with my money the night before. Gavin was pacing near the front door, furiously typing on his phone. His knuckles were white. He was likely reassuring his violent loan sharks that their $2 million payment was only hours away. Kendrick stood by the kitchen island, adjusting the cuffs of a custom gray suit, his eyes darting nervously toward the window every time a car drove past. The federal authorities were breathing down his neck, and the sheer terror radiating from him was a beautiful contrast to his usual arrogant swagger. I did not walk into the kitchen wearing the oversized cardigans and sweatpants of a broken, exhausted woman. I chose a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit with razor-sharp lapels and a crisp silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe polished knot. I applied my makeup with lethal precision, erasing any trace of the pallor the poison had left behind. When I stepped into their line of sight, the kitchen fell dead silent. For a split second, Gavin looked confused. The fragile, weeping victim he had carried into the house yesterday was gone. But his greed quickly overrode his intuition. He rushed forward, offering a dazzling, manufactured smile. "You look stunning, baby," he said, kissing my cheek. "Are you sure you are up for this? You look so strong today." I offered a placid, vacant smile. "I feel incredibly focused, Gavin. I am ready to hand over the burden." Beatrice clapped her hands together, breaking the tension. "Wonderful. The car is waiting outside." Gavin ushered us out the front door. Sitting in the driveway was an obnoxiously large rented black luxury SUV with tinted windows and a private driver holding the door open. Gavin had literally rented a flagship luxury vehicle on credit, completely confident that an $8 million wire transfer would clear his debts by lunch. We all climbed into the cavernous leather interior. Beatrice and Melanie sat in the back, whispering excitedly about reservations at a Michelin-starred restaurant to celebrate later. Kendrick sat rigidly near the window, his knee bouncing in a rapid, anxious rhythm. Gavin sat directly beside me, holding my hand with a tight, possessive grip. He spent the entire ride murmuring false reassurances, telling me how proud he was of me for taking care of my mental health, promising that he and Kendrick would protect my assets with their lives. I nodded along to his sickeningly sweet lies, keeping my face turned toward the window. My free hand was buried deep inside my leather tote bag, resting securely on the encrypted backup phone. Using only my thumb, I navigated the tactile screen by memory. I opened the secure portal Elliot had established. I selected the high-definition audio file of Kendrick and Gavin plotting federal fraud on my balcony. Upload complete. Next, I selected the nanny camera footage of them destroying my office to hack my hardware wallet. Upload complete. Finally, I attached the certified toxicology report from Dr. Eris Thorne, proving the lethal combination of benzodiazepines and muscle relaxants Gavin had slipped into my wine. Upload complete. A small vibration buzzed against my fingertips. It was a confirmation text from Elliot. "The package is secure. The board is set. See you in 5 minutes." The SUV smoothly navigated the busy downtown Seattle streets, turning onto a pristine block lined with towering glass skyscrapers. The driver pulled up to the curb directly in front of the private wealth bank. It was an imposing structure of black marble and bulletproof glass, catering exclusively to high-net-worth individuals. This was where the elite secured their legacies, and this was where my husband intended to execute the final stage of his robbery. Gavin stepped out first, extending his hand to help me down from the SUV. His palm was clammy with cold sweat. Kendrick practically leaped out of the vehicle, his eyes darting up and down the street, paranoid that federal agents might already be watching him. Beatrice and Melanie emerged with their heads held high, strutting across the pavement like conquering royalty arriving to claim their kingdom. I adjusted the collar of my charcoal blazer and gripped my leather tote bag. The heavy glass doors of the bank slid open, welcoming us into the hushed, deeply air-conditioned lobby. The scent of rich mahogany and expensive cologne filled the air. Gavin placed a guiding hand on the small of my back, leaning down to whisper in my ear. "Just a few signatures, baby, and you are free from all of this stress." I looked straight ahead at the polished marble floors, my face set into an unreadable mask. "You are absolutely right, Gavin," I replied smoothly. "By the time we leave this building, I will be completely free." We were greeted by a sharply dressed concierge the moment we crossed the threshold of the private wealth bank. Gavin puffed out his chest, stepping forward to give my name, with a profound sense of inflated authority. He spoke to the staff as if he already owned the vault, relishing the deferential nods he received in return. The concierge led us past the open teller stations, guiding our group toward the restricted access corridors, where the true wealth of the city was managed. The transition from the public lobby to the private wealth management sector was palpable. The harsh lighting gave way to a warm ambient glow. The marble floors transitioned into thick sound-absorbing carpets, and the ambient noise of the city completely vanished, leaving behind a heavy, expensive silence. We were escorted into a sprawling VIP conference room that smelled of polished cherry wood and fresh espresso. A massive gleaming marble table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by plush, oversized leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows covered the far wall, offering a commanding, unobstructed view of the Seattle skyline. It was a visual reminder of the power, exclusivity, and wealth concentrated within these walls. The bank staff offered us a level of service reserved for the ultra-elite. Beatrice immediately made herself at home. She took a seat near the head of the marble table, crossing her legs and adjusting her thick string of pearls as if she were a queen surveying her newly conquered territory. A discreet attendant appeared instantly, offering a menu of premium beverages. Beatrice and Melanie ordered double espressos, their voices dripping with artificial sophistication. They leaned their heads together, chatting quietly about which high-end designer boutiques they planned to raid the moment we concluded our business here. They were literally mentally spending my money while I sat directly across from them. Kendrick did not sit down. Melanie's husband paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, completely ignoring the offered refreshments. He kept adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke gray suit, checking his expensive watch every 30 seconds. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. The federal deadline was looming over him like a guillotine, and every passing minute without an $8 million liquidity injection was a ticking time bomb for his fraudulent crypto fund. The sheer terror radiating from him was a beautiful, satisfying contrast to his usual arrogant alpha male swagger. Gavin pulled out a plush leather chair for me, hovering over my shoulder like a dark protective shadow. He ordered a black coffee for himself and a glass of warm water for me, continuing his meticulous performance of the devoted caretaker. He asked if the room temperature was comfortable, stroking my shoulder with a hand that felt uncomfortably damp with nervous sweat. He was so close to paying off his violent loan sharks, so close to walking away completely clean, that he was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands neatly on my lap. I did not touch the glass of water the attendant placed in front of me. I let my eyes wander over the faces of my in-laws, capturing this final pristine moment of their unearned confidence. They were entirely consumed by their own greed, completely blind to the reality of the room. They truly believed this marble table was a platform for their financial salvation. They did not realize it was an execution block. I controlled my breathing, keeping it shallow and uneven, maintaining the flawless facade of the terrified broken woman they expected to see. Every muscle in my body was coiled tight, ready to spring. I could feel the invisible weight of the evidence I had already dispatched to my legal team, a digital anchor tying their fate directly to a federal prison. The digital clock on the wall shifted to exactly 9 in the morning. The heavy mahogany door clicked, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. Gavin immediately straightened his tie, putting on his best, most charming corporate smile, ready to charm whichever banking official walked through the entrance. Melanie set her espresso cup down on a silver coaster, her eyes wide with unadulterated anticipation. Beatrice leaned forward, her greedy gaze fixed firmly on the doorway. Kendrick stopped pacing entirely, letting out a heavy, ragged breath of relief. The door swung open smoothly. The branch manager, a tall man with silver hair and a meticulously tailored navy suit, stepped into the room. But he was not carrying a silver tray of wire transfer documents. He did not offer a welcoming smile. Instead, he took a deliberate step backward, holding the heavy door open to allow 3 more men to enter the VIP suite. Leading the group was Elliot. He was no longer wearing the cheap rumpled gray suit of a low-level insurance courier from the hospital. Today, my estate attorney was dressed for absolute war. He wore a custom pitch-black 3-piece suit, his tie perfectly knotted, carrying a thick, locked leather briefcase in his right hand. He walked into the VIP room with the predatory, calculated grace of an apex predator entering a cage full of trapped, helpless prey. Flanking Elliot were 2 massive, sharp-suited legal associates. Their faces were carved from stone, their eyes scanning the room with cold, professional detachment. The moment they crossed the threshold, the 2 associates took their positions on either side of the heavy mahogany door, physically and symbolically blocking the only exit from the room. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and violent. The cheerful, greedy anticipation evaporated entirely, replaced by a sudden, suffocating wave of tension. Beatrice froze completely, her hand hovering awkwardly over her espresso cup. Melanie shrank back into her oversized leather chair, instinctively clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if to protect it. Kendrick took a sudden, panicked step away from the window, his eyes darting frantically between Elliot and the 2 imposing associates guarding the door. He recognized the aggressive, uncompromising posture of high-level corporate litigators, and his fight-or-flight response surged to the surface. Gavin dropped his charming smile completely, his brow furrowed in deep confusion, and a flash of genuine, unadulterated fear crossed his face. He recognized Elliot from the brief encounter at the hospital yesterday, but the context had drastically, terrifyingly changed. He looked down at me, searching my face for an explanation, but I kept my gaze fixed blankly ahead, refusing to give him a single clue. Gavin turned his attention back to the imposing figures standing at the front of the room. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to project an authority he absolutely did not possess. "Excuse me," Gavin demanded, his voice echoing too loudly against the cherry wood panels. "Who are you people? What is he doing here?" "She is just here to sign a wire transfer." The bank manager remained perfectly silent, stepping back further into the corner to let the legal team take absolute control of the environment. Elliot did not immediately answer Gavin. Instead, he walked slowly and deliberately toward the center of the marble table, placing his heavy leather briefcase down with a resounding heavy thud. He unfastened the brass locks with 2 sharp clicks that sounded exactly like gunshots in the silent room. I took a deep, steadying breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in 2 days. The manufactured trembling in my hands ceased entirely. I placed my palms flat against the cool marble surface of the table and slowly pushed myself upright. I did not lean on Gavin. I did not cast my eyes downward. I stood to my full height, rolling my shoulders back and lifting my chin to look directly into the eyes of the man who had tried to end my life. The illusion of the broken wife was dead, and the architect of their destruction was finally awake. Gavin stared at me, his hand frozen mid-air as he reached out to guide me back down into my leather chair. He blinked rapidly, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the fragile weeping woman he had pushed into this room with the cold, immovable force now standing over him. The manufactured trembling in my hands had vanished. My posture was rigid and dominant. "Sydney, what are you doing?" he stammered, his voice laced with a sudden sharp edge of panic. "You are sick. You need to sit down before you trigger another episode." I did not lower my gaze. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked onto his, stripping away every ounce of warmth I had ever shown him over the past 4 years. "I am perfectly healthy, Gavin," I replied, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls with absolute clarity. "The only sickness I am suffering from is the parasitic infection that you and your family represent, and today is the day I surgically remove it." Elliot reached into his open briefcase and withdrew a thick, heavily bound legal folder. He did not hand it to the bank manager. He handed it directly to me. The heavy cardstock felt solid and validating in my hands. I placed the folder flat against the polished marble surface of the conference table and pushed it forward. It slid smoothly across the stone, stopping exactly inches from Gavin's trembling fingers. Gavin looked down at the folder, then shot a desperate, angry glare at the bank manager standing in the corner. "Where are the wire transfer authorizations?" Gavin demanded, his mask of the devoted husband finally slipping to reveal the desperate, cornered animal underneath. "We are here to execute a corporate transfer." I leaned forward, resting my palms on the table. "I am not signing a wire transfer, Gavin. I am serving you." The silence in the VIP suite became so absolute it felt like a vacuum. Beatrice let out a sharp gasp of indignation from her seat, but a single lethal glance from one of Elliot's associates froze her in place. Gavin stared at the folder as if it were a live explosive. With shaking hands, he flipped open the heavy cover. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. I did not give him the opportunity to process the documents in silence. I read the inventory aloud, ensuring that every person in the room understood the sheer magnitude of his destruction. "The first document is an emergency petition for divorce," I stated calmly. "The second is a court-ordered absolute financial freeze on every joint account, credit line, and marital asset we share. As of 8 o'clock this morning, your credit cards are entirely declined. Your access to my savings is permanently severed. You are completely and utterly bankrupt." "You cannot do this!" Gavin choked out, his eyes darting frantically across the legal text. "You are having a mental breakdown, Sydney. You do not know what you are doing. I am your legal proxy." I pointed to the next page in his stack. "That proxy was revoked the moment the judge signed the third document in your hand, an immediate permanent restraining order, barring you from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my corporate headquarters. You are being evicted from my property today." Gavin slammed his hand on the table, trying to summon a final surge of authority. "This is a delusion. I will have you committed. I am calling the hospital right now." I smiled, a chilling, hollow expression that finally made him step back. "I think you should look at the final document, Gavin, the one with the certified medical seal." Gavin flipped to the back of the packet, his eyes locked onto the laboratory header. I watched his throat swallow hard as the reality of his situation crushed him. "It is a comprehensive toxicology report from last night," I explained, raising my voice so it carried clearly to the back of the room where his mother and sister were sitting in stunned horror. "It details the massive, near-lethal concentration of fast-acting benzodiazepines in my blood. But more importantly, it highlights the heavy dose of your specific prescription muscle relaxants that you crushed and mixed into my wine." Gavin dropped the folder, the papers scattered across the marble table. He backed away, his hands raised defensively. "That is a fake," he stammered, his voice breaking entirely. "That is a fabricated report." "You did not miscalculate the dose by accident, Gavin." I stepped around the table, backing him into the floor-to-ceiling window. "You intended to stop my heart right there in our dining room. You were perfectly willing to play the grieving widower, just so you could inherit my company payout and cover the $2 million options trading debt you owe to violent loan sharks." Gavin's mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. His knees buckled slightly and he fell backward into an empty plush leather chair as if he had been physically struck. The polished, arrogant corporate manager was entirely gone, replaced by a ghost staring at the end of his life. Elliot stepped forward, buttoning his suit jacket with a terrifying calm. "That medical report is not just a piece of paper, Gavin. It has already been filed with the Seattle Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. You are not just looking at a divorce. You are looking at decades in a federal penitentiary for attempted murder and financial extortion. Gavin buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged, pathetic sound that was half sob and half gasp. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the trap he had walked into. He had nothing left. No money, no leverage, no wife to manipulate. The man who had confidently planned to steal my fortune and leave me for dead was now a broken, hyperventilating mess, waiting for a pair of handcuffs. But my vengeance was not even close to being finished. I turned away from my shattered husband and locked my eyes directly onto the remaining parasite sitting at the table. The suffocating silence in the VIP suite was shattered by the sound of expensive leather scraping violently against the polished marble floor. Kendrick had seen enough. Melanie's husband shot up from his chair, his tall frame towering over the table as he desperately tried to seize control of a narrative that was rapidly spiraling into a catastrophic legal nightmare. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, puffing out his chest to project the dominant, untouchable financial guru persona he had used to intimidate me for years. "Sydney, this is completely out of line," Kendrick declared, pitching his voice into a deep, authoritative baritone. He gestured dismissively toward Gavin's crumpled, hyperventilating form in the corner. "If your husband has involved himself in some sort of illicit gambling debt and unauthorized prescription drug use, that is an internal marital dispute. Melanie Beatrice and I came here strictly as a courtesy to facilitate a standard wealth management transfer. Since you are clearly suffering from severe paranoia, we are canceling the transaction and leaving." He reached down, grabbing Melanie by the elbow to pull her out of her seat. He thought he could just wash his hands of Gavin's murder attempt and walk out the mahogany doors, completely untethered from the disaster. He thought he could go back to his luxury condo and figure out another way to save his collapsing Ponzi scheme. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I simply extended my hand toward Elliot. My attorney seamlessly placed the second heavily bound folder into my palm. I pressed it flat against the cold marble and slid it directly across the table. It stopped precisely an inch from Kendrick's rigid fingertips. "You are not going anywhere, Kendrick," I said, my tone carrying the absolute freezing weight of an executioner. "Open the folder." Kendrick glared at me, his jaw clenching with arrogant defiance, but his eyes darted nervously toward the two imposing legal associates physically blocking the only exit from the room. Reluctantly, he released Melanie's arm and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. I watched his dark, confident complexion turn a startling, sickly shade of gray. The very first page was a high-definition night vision photograph printed on premium glossy paper. It captured him sitting perfectly illuminated at my mahogany desk at 2 a.m, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his specialized hacking rig hardwired directly into my biometric safe. The timestamp glowing in the corner of the image was irrefutable. "Did you really think I built an $8 million digital security company without implementing localized motion, activated surveillance protocols in my own home?" I asked softly, watching his hands begin to shake. "I saw you sweating, Kendrick. I watched you desperately trying to bypass my YubiKey authentication with generic spoofing scripts. You were so frustrated you practically begged Gavin to break my firewall." Kendrick's mouth opened, but his aggressive baritone completely vanished. He flipped to the next page with jerky, uncoordinated movements. The arrogance drained from his body as he stared at a thick, heavily redacted legal document bearing the official seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. "That is an expedited whistleblower submission," I explained, leaning back in my chair and folding my hands neatly in my lap. "I spent my early morning routing a complete forensic digital trace of your entire investment firm directly to the federal authorities. I highlighted exactly how you have been paying your early investors with capital from new clients. You do not manage a decentralized empire. You run a pathetic, hollow Ponzi scheme, and your liquidity is absolutely zero." Melanie let out a sharp, confused gasp from the chair beside him. She looked from the terrifying legal documents to her husband's terrified face. "Kendrick, what is she talking about?" Melanie demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Tell her she is lying. Tell her our accounts are fine." Kendrick could not even look at his wife. He was staring at the SEC documents like a man looking at his own gravestone. Elliot stepped forward perfectly, buttoning his pitch-black suit jacket, radiating the cold surgical precision of a legal predator. "It gets substantially worse for you, Kendrick," my attorney stated, his voice slicing through the heavy air. "The digital hack and the SEC audit are merely the appetizers. Late last night, my client secured a high-grade military-level audio recording of your private conversation with Gavin on the terrace." Kendrick's eyes widened in sheer unadulterated horror. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. "You confessed to everything," Elliot continued ruthlessly. "You admitted that the FBI had already served you with a subpoena. You admitted that you were going to use my client's $8 million payout to pacify the federal auditors just long enough to unfreeze your travel assets. And you detailed your explicit plan to abandon your family, steal $6 million, and flee to a non-extradition country before the authorities could lock you up." Melanie let out a guttural, ear-piercing shriek that rattled the crystal espresso cups on the marble table. She surged to her feet, her meticulously crafted high society facade shattering into a million jagged pieces. "You were going to leave me!" Melanie screamed, grabbing Kendrick by the lapels of his expensive suit and violently shaking him. "You were going to steal her money and run away while the feds seized my house. You absolute coward." Kendrick stumbled backward, desperately trying to pry his hysterical wife off his chest. "Melanie, stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "I had to secure the funds. I was going to send for you later." "Liar!" I cut in, my voice snapping like a whip across the room. "You told Gavin to institutionalize me and claim market volatility when the money vanished. You were perfectly willing to leave me locked in a psychiatric ward and leave your own wife entirely destitute to save your own skin." Melanie spun around, her face twisted with a level of pure venomous hatred I had never seen before. She abandoned her husband and lunged directly at me, her hands curled into claws, her designer handbag falling to the floor. "You ruined everything," Melanie screeched, spittle flying from her lips as she charged across the room. "This is your fault. You set us up." She did not make it past the center of the marble table. The two sharp-suited legal associates moved with blinding speed, intercepting Melanie before she could even come within reaching distance of my chair. They gripped her arms firmly, forcing her aggressively back into her plush leather seat. She thrashed wildly against their iron grip, hyperventilating, her perfectly styled hair falling into a messy, chaotic tangle across her tear-streaked face. I looked down at my sister-in-law, feeling absolutely no pity for the woman who had happily planned to purchase a $200,000 Porsche with the proceeds of my intended murder. "I did not ruin anything, Melanie," I said quietly, letting the freezing truth sink into her bones. "You all dug your own graves. I simply stopped you from burying me inside them." Kendrick collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with trembling hands, as a quiet, pathetic sob escaped his chest. He knew his bespoke suits, his matte black sports car, and his entire fraudulent existence had just evaporated. His passport was useless. His accounts were frozen. The arrogant crypto king was dead. The chaotic echoes of Melanie's hysterical sobbing and Kendrick's ragged breathing bounced off the pristine mahogany walls of the VIP suite. The two imposing legal associates held Melanie firmly in her chair, rendering her completely powerless. Gavin remained crumpled in the corner, a hollow shell of a man staring blankly at the floor. Out of the four monsters in the room, only one still had the sheer delusional audacity to believe she could talk her way out of the slaughter. Beatrice slowly rose from her seat at the head of the marble table. She smoothed down the front of her stark white cashmere coat, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against her thick string of pearls. She lifted her chin, pasting on a mask of deep, maternal sorrow. It was the exact same look of pity and condescension she had weaponized against me for 4 years. "Sydney, please." Beatrice began, pitching her voice into a soft, soothing register designed to calm a terrified child. "This has gone far enough. You are clearly having a severe trauma response. Gavin made a terrible, unforgivable mistake with his gambling debts, and Kendrick has evidently lost his way, but you are destroying the entire family. We took you in Sydney. When you had absolutely no one else in the world, when you were just a struggling girl with a tragic past and a mentally ill mother, we gave you a real home. We gave you our name. We loved you like our own flesh and blood. You cannot do this to me. I stared at her, letting the absolute silence of the room stretch out for 10 agonizing seconds. I wanted everyone to hear the ringing echo of her manipulation. Beatrice was attempting to execute the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. She was trying to position herself as the benevolent matriarch who was completely innocent of her son's attempted murder and her son-in-law's financial fraud, while simultaneously reminding me of my orphan status to enforce a sense of lifelong debt. I remembered our first Thanksgiving dinner at her pristine suburban estate. She had seated me at the far end of the table, loudly explaining to her wealthy friends that I did not know how to use proper silverware because I grew up eating microwave dinners in a tiny apartment. She had spent years actively trying to make me feel like a stray dog she had graciously allowed into her immaculate kennel. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned my head and extended my hand toward Elliot. My attorney did not hesitate. He placed the third and final, heavily bound legal folder into my outstretched palm. It was the thickest one of the entire stack. I placed it onto the cool marble and pushed it directly toward Beatrice. It glided across the polished stone and tapped gently against her espresso cup. "I did not take your name, Beatrice," I stated, my voice echoing with a lethal, freezing calm. "I kept my own name because I built my tech empire with my own two hands. You did not give me a family. You gave me a den of vipers, and you are the queen's snake. Open the folder." Beatrice stared at the heavy cardstock as if it were coated in venom. She looked at Elliot, then at the two associates, realizing that her maternal performance had failed completely. With a shaking, manicured hand, she flipped the cover open. "That is a formal civil lawsuit," I explained, watching the color rapidly drain from her perfectly contoured face. "You are being sued for conspiracy to commit theft, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and extensive property damage." Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. "Property damage conspiracy. I had nothing to do with Gavin hacking your safe. I was simply planning a welcome home dinner." "Do not insult my intelligence," I cut in sharply. "You booked a luxury caterer on Gavin's credit card while he was upstairs destroying my home office. You sat in my living room last night and explicitly discussed purchasing a $5 million waterfront estate in Medina using the exact funds you knew Gavin was coercing me to transfer. You were fully aware that your son drugged me, and you happily provided the psychological warfare at the hospital to help him secure financial conservatorship over my assets." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, completely devoid of oxygen. Her eyes darted wildly across the dense legal text detailing her exact involvement in the plot to strip me of my company payout. "But the financial penalties are the least of your concerns, Beatrice." I continued, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "You have spent your entire adult life building a pristine, untouchable high society reputation. You sit on the board of 3 major charities. You host the most exclusive country club galas in Seattle. Your entire identity is wrapped up in being superior to everyone else." Beatrice's hands began to shake violently. She dropped the legal documents, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into pure, unadulterated panic. "Sydney, please," she begged, the aristocratic arrogance finally bleeding out of her voice. "You cannot file this. If this goes on to the public record, I will be ruined. My friends will abandon me, the club will expel me, I will be a total pariah." I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made her physically recoil. "It was filed electronically 20 minutes ago," I informed her. "It is already a matter of public record. By lunchtime, the local news outlets will have the complete court filings. By dinner, every single one of your wealthy country club friends will be reading the detailed transcripts of how you conspired to institutionalize your daughter-in-law to steal $8 million. "No," Beatrice shrieked, a raw, guttural sound that tore through her throat. "You manipulative, ungrateful wretch. I will lose everything. My house, my standing, my entire life." "You are going to lose much more than your social standing," Elliot interjected smoothly, stepping up to the table. The property damage to my client's custom server architecture and the deliberate destruction of her home office totals over $300,000. We will be placing an immediate lien on your suburban home to cover the damages. You will not be moving to Medina Beatrice. You will be selling your current house just to afford the retaining fees for your defense attorneys. Beatrice collapsed into her chair, her white cashmere coat bunching around her shoulders as she buried her face in her hands. The formidable, cruel matriarch who had terrorized me for 4 years was completely gone. She was nothing but a hollow, terrified woman staring at the absolute annihilation of her entire world. She sobbed loudly, a pathetic wet sound that joined the chorus of despair echoing from Gavin and Melanie. I stood tall at the head of the marble table looking down at the absolute wreckage of the family that had tried to bury me. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I had simply held up a mirror to their own monstrous greed, and they had shattered their own lives against the glass. The VIP suite of the private wealth bank had transformed into an airtight tomb. The heavy scent of expensive espresso and rich cherry wood was now entirely overpowered by the distinct metallic stench of sheer human panic. For 4 years I had watched this family move through the world with untouchable arrogance, believing their fabricated prestige shielded them from consequence. Now that delusion lay shattered across the marble table buried beneath layers of undeniable legal evidence. Melanie was the first to completely unravel. She slumped forward in her oversized leather chair, clutching her chest as a violent bout of hyperventilation overtook her. Her manicured nails dug desperately into the pristine fabric of her designer dress. The reality of Kendrick's federal indictment had finally pierced her thick skull. She was not getting a custom ivory Porsche. She was getting asset forfeiture, frozen bank accounts, and the imminent seizure of her luxury rental home. She turned her head wildly, looking at Kendrick, but her husband was entirely unresponsive. The sharp, successful African-American crypto consultant was frozen like a statue, staring blankly at the wall, his mind already calculating the bleak reality of a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Melanie shifted her frantic gaze to me. "Sydney, please," she gasped, struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs. "I did not know Gavin was going to poison you. I swear I did not know about the drugs. You cannot let them take everything from me. I will testify against them. I will tell the police whatever you want." I looked at my sister-in-law, feeling a profound sense of disgust. She was instantly willing to throw her own brother into the fire just to save her designer handbag collection. Before I could even respond to her pathetic display of disloyalty, a sudden movement caught my eye. Gavin pushed himself up from the dark corner of the room. His legs trembled so violently he could barely support his own weight. The impeccably tailored suit he had worn to claim his stolen millions now hung on his frame like a wrinkled shroud. He stumbled blindly toward the head of the table, his breath coming in ragged, desperate hitches. The 2 imposing legal associates shifted their stances, ready to intercept him, but Elliot held up a single hand, allowing my husband to approach. Gavin did not attack. He did not yell. He simply collapsed. He dropped heavily onto his knees right beside my chair, the loud thud of his bones hitting the marble floor echoing through the silent room. He reached out with shaking, sweaty hands, desperately gripping the hem of my charcoal blazer. "Sydney, look at me." Gavin pleaded, tears streaming freely down his pale cheeks, leaving wet trails of absolute terror. "You have to listen to me. I did not want to hurt you. I swear on my life I never wanted to hurt you. I was desperate. The loan sharks told me they knew where we lived. They told me they were going to break into the house and torture us if I did not clear the $2 million options debt by Friday. I was trying to protect you. I only used the sedatives so I could transfer the money and pay them off before they hurt us." He was lying even now, right at the absolute end of his rope. He was trying to spin his attempted murder into an act of twisted, desperate heroism. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, practically begging for a single ounce of the empathy I used to give him so freely. "I loved you, Sydney." He choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "I still love you. Please, just let me walk away. Keep the money. Keep the house. Just do not send me to prison. They will kill me in there. I am begging you, please show some mercy." I stared down at the man kneeling at my feet. For 4 years, I had built my life around him. I had trusted him with my vulnerabilities, shared my successes, and believed we were building a future together. But looking at him now stripped of his arrogant charm and his expensive facade, I saw exactly what he was. He was a coward, a parasite who fed on my ambition and tried to extinguish my life the moment his own reckless choices caught up with him. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just the clean, sharp edge of finality. I calmly reached down and pried his sweaty, trembling fingers off the fabric of my blazer. I took a deliberate step backward, creating an insurmountable physical distance between us. I stood up to my full height, carefully adjusting the lapels of my coat, ensuring my posture projected the unshakable power of a woman who had just conquered her own nightmare. "You do not know the meaning of the word love, Gavin," I stated, my voice ringing out with cold, deliberate precision. "Love does not slip muscle relaxants into a glass of Cabernet. Love does not stand over an unconscious body and plot a bank transfer. You did not do this to protect me. You did this because you are a weak gambling addict who thought his self-made wife was just a bank account waiting to be drained." Gavin let out a miserable sob, burying his face in his hands as he remained kneeling on the cold floor. "You all thought you were so incredibly smart." I continued, letting my gaze sweep across the ruined family. "You thought because I did not grow up with a trust fund or a country club membership, I was just a naive, fragile girl you could easily manipulate. You thought you could strip me down, institutionalize me, and decorate your future mansions with my life work." Beatrice let out a quiet, devastated wail from her seat, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of her miscalculation. "But you made one fatal error," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing whisper. "You played Russian roulette with my life, and you forgot to check if the chamber was loaded. You took a gamble, and you lost everything. There are no negotiations today. There are no second chances. You are all going to face the absolute crushing weight of the consequences you built for yourselves." Gavin looked up, his face twisted in a mask of total despair. "Sydney, please, what are you going to do?" I did not need to answer him. The answer was already arriving. The heavy silence in the VIP suite was suddenly broken by a shifting glow reflecting across the polished mahogany walls. I turned my head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy Seattle street below. Through the thick tinted glass, a rhythmic pulsing pattern of brilliant red and blue flashing lights began to reflect brightly against the room, casting erratic shadows over the terrified faces of my in-laws. The cavalry had arrived. The muffled wail of sirens outside abruptly cut off, replaced by the sharp, authoritative slam of heavy vehicle doors. Down below, the street had become a staging ground for a coordinated raid. Inside the VIP suite, the air grew so thick and stagnant that it felt hard to breathe. Gavin remained frozen on his knees, his eyes wide and locked onto the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the mahogany panels. Kendrick gripped the edge of the marble table, his knuckles white, staring at the door like a man waiting for a firing squad. Muffled shouts echoed from the main banking floor. The heavy soundproofed door of our suite swung open, not with a polite knock, but with the swift, uncompromising force of law enforcement. The bank manager stepped aside, his face pale but composed, making way for a wave of tactical vests, golden badges, and heavy utility belts. A joint task force of Seattle Police Department detectives and federal agents flooded the room. The polished elite sanctuary of the private wealth bank was instantly transformed into a sterile crime scene. A tall federal agent in a sharp suit broke off from the pack, walking directly toward Kendrick. The arrogant crypto consultant did not even try to run or argue. The federal agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Kendrick, you are being placed under federal arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, securities, fraud, and flight risk evasion," the agent stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Melanie let out a piercing guttural scream as the metal cuffs clicked shut around her husband's wrists. She lunged forward, trying to grab Kendrick's tailored suit, but a uniformed officer firmly held her back by the shoulders. Kendrick offered no resistance at all. He looked completely dead behind the eyes, the reality of his collapsing Ponzi scheme and his impending federal prison sentence draining the last ounce of defiance from his muscular frame. A second agent immediately seized Kendrick's sleek laptop and his mobile phone, slipping the high-end devices into static-proof evidence bags. His digital empire was officially seized and dismantled right in front of his wife. While the federal agents secured Kendrick, two Seattle police detectives aggressively approached Gavin. My husband was still trembling on the marble floor, his tear-stained face looking up at the officers with a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy. "Get on your feet," the lead detective ordered, gripping Gavin by the upper arm and hauling him roughly upward. The expensive fabric of his tailored suit bunched and wrinkled under the detective's firm, unforgiving grip. "Gavin, you are under arrest," the detective announced, speaking loud enough for every single person in the vicinity to hear clearly. "The charges are domestic violence, attempted extortion, and assault with a deadly weapon, specifically the intentional administration of a controlled substance. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Gavin thrashed wildly, his sudden panic overriding his common sense. "No, you do not understand," Gavin shrieked, twisting his shoulders as the cold steel bit into his wrists and ratcheted tightly. "She is my wife. We were just having a financial disagreement. I did not try to kill her. It was just a sleep aid. I just needed a temporary loan to pay off my debts. Please, you have to listen to me. I am a corporate executive." The detective ignored his frantic self-incriminating babbling, tightening the handcuffs and spinning him toward the open door. Beatrice threw herself forward, her pristine white cashmere coat slipping completely off her shoulders and pooling on the floor. She grabbed the detective's forearm, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a grotesque mask of pure hysteria. "You cannot take my son." Beatrice wailed, her aristocratic facade entirely obliterated by maternal panic. "He is a respected manager. He is a good boy. That woman is lying. She set him up to steal our family legacy." "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with interfering with an active arrest." A uniformed officer barked, stepping forcefully between Beatrice and her son. "We have a certified toxicology report and extensive audio evidence of a conspiracy. Your son is going to jail." Beatrice collapsed against the cherry wood-paneled walls, sliding down to the floor as her legs completely gave out beneath her. She covered her face with trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The wealthy, manipulative matriarch who had terrorized me for 4 years was officially reduced to a weeping, broken mess on the floor of a bank lobby. Melanie had dropped to her knees beside her mother, rocking back and forth, crying hysterically, as she watched the federal agents march Kendrick out the door. The two women who had mocked my working-class roots and happily planned to spend my company payout on waterfront estates and luxury sports cars were now completely stripped of their men, their stolen wealth, and their dignity. Elliot stood securely beside me, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the tactical removal with cold, clinical satisfaction. The legal associates flanked us, creating a secure, protective perimeter as the police hauled Gavin toward the exit. As Gavin was dragged past my chair, he dug his heels into the thick carpet, turning his tear-streaked, terrified face in my direction one final time. "Sydney, please," Gavin begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate squeal. "Do not let them do this to me. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Please, Sydney, have mercy on me." I looked right through him. He was no longer my husband. He was just a violent, pathetic stranger who had lost a high-stakes gamble and was about to pay the ultimate price. "Take him away," I said softly to the lead detective. The police shoved him forward, marching him out into the main banking floor. The elite clientele and the suited bank tellers stood in stunned, absolute silence, watching the disgraced finance executive being paraded in handcuffs through the lobby of the institution he thought would make him a millionaire. Elliot handed me my leather tote bag. "The immediate threat is neutralized," he said quietly, a rare hint of a smile touching his face. "Your assets are locked. The divorce petition is filed, and the civil suits against your mother-in-law and sister-in-law are actively out for service. Shall we go?" I nodded, adjusting the sharp lapels of my charcoal blazer to ensure not a single crease remained. I walked out of the VIP suite, my heels clicking rhythmically and powerfully against the polished marble floor. I stepped into the main lobby where Beatrice and Melanie were still crying violently, huddled together on a plush waiting bench under the watchful eye of a bank security guard. They looked up as I approached, their eyes red swollen and filled with absolute crushing defeat. Beatrice reached out a trembling hand, her voice cracking as she tried to form my name. I did not break my stride. I did not pause to listen to her apologies, her excuses, or her pathetic pleas for financial mercy. I kept my head held high, my posture projecting the unbreakable silent power of a woman who had reclaimed her life and her empire. I walked right past them, without a single backward glance. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the bank and stepped out into the crisp, fresh Seattle air, leaving the absolute wreckage of their lives entirely behind me. 1 month later, the Seattle air carried the crisp, undeniable chill of early winter, but inside my new downtown penthouse, the temperature was perfectly regulated. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, holding a warm mug of black coffee, watching the city wake up below me. The sheer, uninterrupted silence of my morning routine was the greatest luxury I had ever purchased. Down there, navigating the cold concrete and the relentless traffic, the family that had tried to bury me was currently being ground into absolute dust by the American justice system. The legal dismantling of their lives was not just brutal, it was a masterpiece of orchestrated consequence. Elliot had kept me updated on every single courtroom development, delivering the news with the cold surgical precision of a mortician reading an autopsy report. Gavin was the first domino to be entirely crushed under the weight of his own hubris. His high-priced defense attorneys, paid for by liquidating the last remaining equity in Beatrice's suburban home, had desperately petitioned for bail. They tried to paint him as a victim of a sudden mental breakdown, an upstanding corporate citizen who just made one terrible mistake under the pressure of severe financial distress. They asked the judge for house arrest with an ankle monitor. The prosecuting attorney did not even flinch. She simply played the high-definition audio recording from the balcony, explicitly detailing Gavin's $2 million debt to violent organized loan sharks, followed by his agreed-upon plan to flee the country with his brother-in-law. The judge slammed the gavel down before the recording even finished. Gavin was deemed an extreme flight risk and an active danger to his spouse. Bail was categorically denied. He was remanded back to the county jail, trading his tailored designer suits for a standard-issue bright orange jumpsuit. But the criminal charges were only a fraction of Gavin's ruin. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority moved with blinding speed the moment the attempted extortion and wire fraud charges were made public. His corporate finance licenses were permanently revoked. His employer, terrified of the public relations nightmare, fired him with cause, voiding his lucrative severance package and seizing his remaining stock options. The prestigious corporate world he had worshipped so deeply completely erased him from its ranks. Gavin was professionally annihilated, locked in a concrete cell, waiting for a trial that would undoubtedly send him to prison for over a decade. Kendrick fared absolutely no better against the crushing weight of the federal government. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission descended upon his boutique cryptocurrency consulting firm like a swarm of locusts. They did not just audit his books, they completely dismantled his entire financial existence. The investigators found exactly what Kendrick had tearfully confessed on the audio recording. His decentralized empire was nothing but a hollow, aggressively mismanaged Ponzi scheme. There was no proprietary algorithm. There were no high-yield returns. He had simply been shuffling money from new investors to pay off the old ones, skimming millions off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. The Federal Asset Forfeiture Unit moved in and seized everything. They froze all of his domestic and offshore accounts. They impounded his prized matte black sports car right out of the driveway of his rental home, hooking it up to a tow truck, while his neighbors stood on their lawns and watched the humiliating spectacle. Kendrick was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, entirely unable to post bond, because every single cent he had ever claimed to earn was now classified as stolen evidence. The arrogant, fast-talking alpha male, who used to belittle my digital accessibility software, was facing 20 counts of federal wire fraud. The sheer scale of the financial freeze left Melanie completely stranded in a disaster of her own making. For years, she had paraded around Seattle, acting as if she were untouchable royalty, funding her exorbitant shopping habits with money her husband had effectively stolen from innocent people. The sudden violent severing of her cash flow hit her like a freight train. Without Kendrick's fraudulent income, and with Beatrice completely paralyzed by the massive property lien my civil suit had slapped onto her suburban home, Melanie was entirely cut off. The management company overseeing her luxury rental estate served her with a 3-day pay or quit eviction notice. She had no savings of her own. She had no marketable skills. She had absolutely nothing but closets full of expensive fabric and leather. Elliot had forwarded me a rather pathetic report from one of his private investigators just yesterday afternoon. Melanie was spotted standing in the pouring rain outside a high-end designer consignment shop in downtown Seattle. The woman who had proudly flaunted a brochure for a $200,000 custom Porsche was now aggressively haggling with a store clerk over the resale value of her quilted leather handbags just to afford the deposit on a cheap, cramped apartment across town. Her credit cards were declined. Her affluent social circle had blocked her number the second the federal indictments hit the local news. She was packing her belongings into garbage bags, utterly humiliated and completely broke. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, feeling the warm liquid slide down my throat. I watched a ferry glide smoothly across the dark blue waters of the Puget Sound in the distance. A month ago, I was fighting to keep my heart beating on a dining room floor, surrounded by monsters waiting for me to die. They had fully expected to step over my corpse to secure their waterfront mansions and luxury cars. Now they were locked in cages or begging for scraps, entirely consumed by the fires of their own greed. I felt absolutely no remorse. I felt no lingering sadness for the husband who had tried to murder me, or the family that had cheered him on. I simply turned away from the window, set my empty coffee mug on the kitchen counter, and walked toward my home office to begin my workday. The dominoes had fallen exactly as they were meant to, and I was completely wonderfully unbothered. Beatrice had spent her entire adult life meticulously constructing an impenetrable fortress of social superiority. She worshipped the gilded hierarchy of Seattle's elite, curating her friendships based on net worth and country club lineage. She honestly believed that her pristine reputation would shield her from any real consequence. She was profoundly, catastrophically wrong. The American justice system had dismantled her son and son-in-law, but it was the high society she so desperately craved that ultimately delivered her absolute ruin. The story did not stay contained within the mahogany walls of the private wealth bank. The details of the federal raid and Gavin's arrest were simply too sensational to suppress. The local news stations picked up the story within 48 hours. The headline, "Poisoned for a Payout," flashed across every major news network in the Pacific Northwest. The reporters did not hold back. They detailed the entire conspiracy, outlining how a respected corporate finance executive had attempted to murder his self-made tech founder wife to cover violent gambling debts, aided by his mother and sister. They broadcasted Kendrick's federal indictment for running a multi-million-dollar crypto Ponzi scheme right alongside Gavin's mugshot. Beatrice's carefully curated world imploded with terrifying speed. The first blow came from the Seattle Heritage Country Club, an exclusive institution where Beatrice had reigned supreme for over 2 decades. The board of directors held an emergency meeting the morning the news broke. They did not even bother to call her in for a hearing. A courier simply arrived at her suburban estate, delivering a heavy cream-colored envelope containing a formal letter of expulsion. The letter stated that the family's recent legal controversies fundamentally violated the club's strict moral turpitude clause. Her membership was permanently revoked effective immediately. She was banned from stepping foot on the property she considered her second home. The charity boards followed suit in rapid succession. Beatrice had proudly sat on the steering committees for the city's most prestigious philanthropic organizations, using the positions to flex her social dominance over lesser members. By the end of the week, she had received 4 separate calls from board presidents asking for her immediate resignation. They were polite, but completely ruthless. They explained that having the mother of an attempted murderer and a federal fraudster associated with their charities was a catastrophic public relations liability. She was quietly erased from every donor list event program and social registry in the city. Beatrice tried desperately to cling to her remaining social lifelines. She started calling her closest, wealthiest friends, hoping to spin the narrative, eager to play the victim of a vindictive daughter-in-law. But the phone lines were dead. The women who had happily drank her imported wine and nodded along as she insulted my modest background now refused to answer her calls. They blocked her number. When Beatrice attempted to show up uninvited to a high society luncheon she had previously RSVP'd to, the hostess actually had the private security team turn her away at the gates. Beatrice was treated like a carrier of a highly contagious, socially fatal disease. She was entirely excommunicated. The psychological devastation of her social ruin was quickly overshadowed by the crushing reality of her financial collapse. Gavin's high-powered defense attorneys demanded an exorbitant, non-refundable retainer fee just to take the case, warning Beatrice that fighting an attempted murder charge backed by federal audio recordings and certified toxicology reports would require a massive legal team. Beatrice had no liquid assets left to cover the costs. The civil lawsuit I had filed against her and Melanie for conspiracy, emotional abuse, and the $300,000 in property damage to my server architecture had effectively placed a massive legal lien on her suburban estate. She could not access her credit lines. She could not leverage her investments. The only way she could physically pay for her son's defense was to sell the pristine, sprawling suburban mansion she had used to assert her dominance over me for 4 years. I watched the real estate listing pop up on my tablet while eating breakfast in my penthouse. The listing agent, clearly trying to distance the property from the scandal, had quietly put it on the market as a highly motivated seller seeking an all-cash offer. They were desperate. The asking price was slashed aggressively, coming in hundreds of thousands of dollars below market value, just to secure a quick sale. Beatrice was forced to pack up her life in a matter of weeks. The woman who had sneered at my working-class roots, who had gleefully planned to move into a $5 million waterfront mansion in Medina using my stolen company payout, was now frantically boxing up her designer clothes to move into a cramped, aggressively mediocre apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. She had to hire discount movers because she could no longer afford the premium white glove services she usually demanded. She watched strangers trample through her pristine living room, haggling over the price of her antique furniture during a hastily arranged estate sale. She was stripped of her home, her status, and the very identity she had used to terrorize me. The elite matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined woman facing a mountain of insurmountable legal debt and absolute public humiliation. And the most beautiful part of her entire collapse was that I did not have to lift a single finger to execute it. The society she worshipped had devoured her whole. The absolute tranquility of my penthouse was abruptly shattered by the sharp, persistent ringing of my personal cell phone. I had blocked every single phone number associated with my former in-laws the very morning I walked out of the private wealth bank. I had even instructed my telecom provider to automatically filter known spam and restricted callers. But the number flashing across my glowing screen was a local unregistered digit string. It was a prepaid burner phone. I set my coffee mug down on the pristine quartz countertop. A part of me knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. I could have simply ignored it, letting it ring out into the digital void, but I picked up the device and pressed the green accept button. I did not say a word. I just held the phone to my ear and listened to the heavy, ragged breathing transmitting through the speaker. "Sydney, please do not hang up." The voice was rough, trembling, and completely stripped of its usual aristocratic polish. It was Beatrice. The formidable, condescending matriarch who used to terrorize me at family dinners now sounded like a terrified, broken shell of a woman. I had to buy a prepaid phone with cash at a corner pharmacy just to reach you. Beatrice choked out her words, stumbling over a wet, pathetic sob. Your attorney refuses to pass along my messages. He just keeps sending certified letters from the court. Sydney, I am begging you to listen to me for just 1 minute. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my ankles. I felt my pulse, and it was perfectly, remarkably steady. I did not feel a single spike of anxiety or anger. I just listened to the sound of her desperation, letting the absolute silence on my end force her to keep talking. They are taking the house! Sydney, Beatrice cried, her voice cracking under the weight of her own ruin. The real estate agent says the market is completely dead for properties tied to high-profile criminal scandals. We have dropped the asking price 3 times, but nobody wants to buy it. And even if they do, the massive legal lien you placed on the deed means I will not see a single penny from the sale. It will all go directly to your civil damages and Gavin's defense attorneys. She paused, desperately sucking in a breath of air. I will have absolutely nothing, she wept. I am an old woman, Sydney. My friends have completely abandoned me. My reputation is destroyed. Melanie will not even return my phone calls because she blames me for encouraging Gavin's horrific plan. I am entirely alone. If you do not drop the civil lawsuit, I am going to end up on the street. You have your company. You have your $8 million. You already won. Please, I am begging you to show a little bit of mercy. I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the gray Seattle clouds roll slowly over the city skyline. Beatrice was trying to execute one final desperate manipulation. She was trying to frame my pursuit of justice as an act of excessive cruelty, hoping to trigger the same people-pleasing anxiety she had exploited for 4 long years. When her weeping did not elicit a response from me, she tried to play the ultimate heavily worn trump card. We took you in, Beatrice whispered, trying to inject a note of maternal warmth into her shattered voice. I know things got out of hand at the end, but we used to be a family. We shared holidays. We shared our home. Deep down underneath all of this legal warfare and anger, you know I always cared about you. You cannot just throw your family out onto the cold street. The audacity of her statement hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She was literally trying to leverage the concept of family loyalty against the woman her son had just tried to assassinate. She wanted me to forget the toxicology report, forget the hacked server, and forget the terrifying reality of waking up in a hospital bed surrounded by predators. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I did not give her the satisfaction of hearing a single ounce of emotion in my tone. I spoke with a chillingly calm, surgical precision that cut straight through the phone line and directly into her bones. Family doesn't put muscle relaxants in your wine, Beatrice. A sharp, terrified gasp echoed from the other end of the line. The truth of my words hit her with the force of a physical blow, completely neutralizing her fake maternal performance. Keep the house. I continued, my voice dropping into a freezing, absolute whisper. You will need it to pay your lawyers because I am taking every cent you have left. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not want to hear another apology, another excuse, or another pathetic plea for financial mercy. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, terminating the connection instantly. I immediately opened my security settings, navigated to the call log, and permanently blocked the burner number. I then opened my secure messaging application and sent a quick text to Elliot, instructing him to file a formal complaint regarding Beatrice's violation of our legal contact boundaries. The message was clear. Any future communication attempts from her would be met with immediate legal sanctions. Total uncompromising no contact was officially enforced. I set the phone face down on the quartz counter and picked up my coffee mug. The liquid was still perfectly warm. I took a slow sip, savoring the rich, dark flavor. The lingering shadows of Gavin, Kendrick, Melanie, and Beatrice were finally permanently excised from my world. They had tried to push me into an early grave, and instead I had buried them alive under the weight of their own monumental greed. I turned my back on the phone, walking toward my home office, to start my day entirely free and beautifully untouched by the ashes I had left behind. The morning light in Seattle is usually filtered through a thick layer of gray, but today the sun broke through the clouds with a blinding, brilliant clarity. I stood in the center of my brand new 8,000 square foot commercial penthouse office. The walls were pure glass, offering an unobstructed 360-degree view of the downtown skyline and the shimmering waters of Elliott Bay. I rested my hands on the edge of my custom-cut obsidian desk. The surface was smooth cold and perfectly pristine. There were no hidden microphones beneath it. There were no desperate, greedy relatives lurking outside the heavy oak doors waiting to tear me apart. There was only the quiet, steady hum of absolute success. It had been exactly 6 months since the federal raid at the private wealth bank. The legal machinery had ground my former in-laws into fine dust, effectively erasing them from the Seattle map. But I did not spend my days thinking about Gavin in his concrete cell or Beatrice downsizing into a cramped, aggressively mediocre apartment. I did not waste a single ounce of my energy harboring bitterness or holding on to the trauma of that night. Bitterness is a poison you drink yourself, hoping the other person dies. I had already survived one real poisoning. I was certainly not going to administer a second one to my own soul. Instead of dwelling on the wreckage, I took my $8 million buyout and immediately reinvested it. I did not buy a useless fleet of sports cars or a ridiculously oversized waterfront mansion just to impress high society socialites. I built a brand new technology incubator, specifically designed to fund and develop advanced digital security protocols and accessibility software for vulnerable populations. I took the very algorithms that had protected my life and turned them into a fortress for others. A soft melodic chime echoed from the private elevator bank located at the far end of the office suite. The polished steel doors slid open smoothly. I turned around, a genuine, completely unburdened smile spreading across my face. Elliot stepped out of the elevator first. My attorney had traded his terrifying pitch-black courtroom suits for a sharp-tailored navy blazer and an open-collared shirt. The predatory edge he carried into legal battles was completely gone, replaced by the relaxed, confident demeanor of a man who had flawlessly executed his job. In his hands, he carried a frosted silver bucket holding a bottle of vintage champagne. Walking right behind him were Liam and Ivy. They were the brilliant, fiercely loyal core architects from my original development team. When Gavin had tried to frame me as mentally unstable and incompetent, it was Liam who securely routed all my digital assets into an impenetrable holding trust. It was Ivy who had meticulously installed the hidden motion-activated cameras in my home office and monitored the security logs that caught Kendrick trying to breach the firewall. They did not share my bloodline, and they did not share my last name, but they had stood right beside me on the front lines of a war they did not have to fight. "We are officially live, Sydney," Liam announced, holding up his tablet. His face was beaming with pure excitement. The initial funding rounds for the incubator just cleared the regulatory boards. We have our first cohort of developers moving into the lower floors on Monday morning. Ivy walked over and pulled me into a tight, warm embrace. "It is bulletproof," she whispered, stepping back and looking around the massive, sun-drenched office. "We ran the penetration tests all night. The new architecture is completely flawless. Nobody is ever getting past our walls again." Elliot set the silver bucket down on the corner of my obsidian desk and expertly popped the cork on the champagne. The crisp, celebratory sound echoed beautifully against the glass walls. He poured the sparkling liquid into 4 crystal flutes, handing them out to each of us. "I propose a toast," Elliot said, raising his glass toward the ceiling. "To Sydney. You faced the absolute worst kind of betrayal a person can experience. You were surrounded by people who wanted to strip you down and leave you with nothing. But you did not just survive them. You outsmarted them, you outmaneuvered them, and you built an empire directly on top of their ruins, to the new venture and to total unshakable freedom." "To freedom," Liam and Ivy echoed in unison, their voices ringing with genuine love and respect. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the bright morning sunlight. To the people who actually show up, I replied softly, my heart feeling incredibly full. To the family we choose. We clinked our glasses together. The champagne was cold crisp and tasted like absolute victory. As my team laughed and began discussing the logistical rollout for the new developers, I took a slow step back, giving them the floor. I turned my head to look out the massive windows once more. Far below me, the city moved at its usual frantic pace. People were rushing to meetings, fighting for promotions, and desperately trying to climb ladders built by other people. I had stepped completely off that ladder. I had cut away the dead weight of a toxic marriage and a parasitic family, leaving behind a life built on expectations and obligation. Gavin, Beatrice, Melanie, and Kendrick had severely underestimated me. They saw a woman with a modest background and assumed I was a naive target. They thought my kindness was weakness. They learned the hardest possible way that I possessed a spine made of reinforced steel. They gambled their lives for a payout, and they ended up with absolutely nothing. I stood at the pinnacle of the city, surrounded by colleagues who respected my mind and an attorney who protected my future. I had my wealth, my health, and my sanity perfectly intact. I took a deep breath of the clean, quiet air inside my penthouse office. They had tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a seed. I had grown into an untouchable force, and my ultimate devastating revenge was simply living a beautiful, wildly successful life, completely and utterly unbothered. Sydney's journey teaches a profound lesson about self-worth. Legal ties do not define a true family. When faced with ultimate betrayal by her husband and in-laws, she didn't succumb to their gaslighting or despair. Instead, she used her sharp intellect to secure her assets and let their own greed destroy them. The most empowering takeaway is that the greatest revenge isn't seeking destruction, but rather building an impenetrable, thriving life without them. She found genuine loyalty in her chosen family of supportive colleagues. Stand firm in your truth and protect your peace today. Please share your story and comment below.